At number 10, some background. The Mughal dynasty in India was founded by Babur, a descendant of the one, the only, Genghis Khan and Tamerlane. After he defeated a sultan of Delhi named Ibrahim Lodi in 1526, Babur was the first step in the Mughal dynasty that would last for over 3 centuries. To say that the empire was immense is an understatement. The empire ruled over 103 million people, probably even more. The Mughals were rooted in Muslim beliefs and were noted for their well-organized government and cultural sophistication. Many of the rulers tried to integrate the Hindus and Muslims under one state, but as we will find out from this list, it was not an easy thing to do, which ended up causing a lot of strife. Many rulers of the empire flip-flopped back and forth between being merciful and tyrannical towards the Hindus, adding to centuries of oppression. At number 9, blinded. Humayun was set to inherit the throne from his father, much to the jealousy of his brothers. He was 23 when he ascended the throne in 1530 after the death of his father. His brothers reigned over different fiefs, but none of them were satisfied unless they had the crown. He also wasn't the best ruler. Humayun was sent into exile for 15 years after he was overthrown by one of his father's generals, Sher Shah. Humayun fled and eventually ended up in Persia, where he built back up an army through his partnership with the Shah. Slowly he took back his land, facing his own brothers who were constantly scheming against him. But Babur, his father, made him promise that he would never lay a hand on his brothers. But his brother Kamran continued to threaten him, and one instance while defending a fort turned on the innocents trapped inside and took their lives viciously. Kamran, not a good dude. Something needed to be done. He eventually catches his scheming brothers, blinds his brother Kamran, and chains his brother Askari. A little messed up, but not bad for war. Before I carry on with the rest of the video, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel and maybe consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far. At number 8, Akbar. Humayun continued to deal with the competition of his brothers until finally his reign came to an end, but not in the way that you would expect. He was carrying a bunch of books up some stairs and he accidentally fell, leading to a lethal head injury. His 13-year-old son Akbar had to inherit the throne. Akbar would later become known as the Great, but that doesn't mean that he didn't do some questionable things. Where his father failed to conquer, Akbar swept through. But just like his father, he encountered jealousy and dangerous ambition in the dark corners of his reign. In Delhi, an attempt to assassinate him was made, the bowman nearly missing him. Who was behind it? The slave of a nobleman who recently tried to start a rebellion. But the plot thickens. Akbar's foster brother's mother had further designs to establish power for herself through her son, Adam Khan. Khan actually ended up taking the life of Akbar's foster father, which led to Akbar throwing him down the stairs and therefore killing him. The mother died 40 days later due to grief. Grief over her son or the loss of power? Who knows? At number 7, Jahangir. So this guy was super impatient to become the ruler and was getting tired of Daddy Akbar taking his time. So he revolted. Damn, this court honestly was just rife with rebellion. They never got tired of it. In 1599, while his father was otherwise engaged and away from the palace, Prince Salim led a revolt. During the revolt, he even skinned a man alive. Akbar was pissed about this and wrote to his son and said, quote, "I have never skinned a bird alive in my life, and you have treated a human being in this manner." Jahangir then went on to conspire against a close advisor of his father named Abul Fazl, whom Jahangir killed in a small battle. Despite Akbar being devastated at his son's behavior, he was the only male heir left to inherit, so on Akbar's deathbed he forgave his son and implored the nobles to recognize him as a leader. At number 6, sewed to an ox. Now Jahangir was emperor, but the trouble didn't stop there. I saw some sources recognize him as a somewhat benevolent figure, while others said that he was the exact opposite. He was pretty brutal, and his first task was crushing a rebellion against that which his own son began. Apple, not far from the tree. He was traveling to Lahore when he came across 2 nobles who were sympathetic to his son's cause, so he decided to punish them in a very peculiar and violent way. He ordered that one be sewed to the skin of an ass and the other to an ox. Now that is messed up. When he got to Lahore to face the rebels, he crushed them and blinded his own son as punishment. A ruler couldn't have any impediment, so therefore his son could no longer pursue the role. Then he hung his son's followers outside of Taxali Gate. Yeah, so even within the confines of war, this guy had some pretty messed up ideas.
A lesson in theft, the strawberry tiara. Why theft? Because a lot of these stolen jewels are the cursed ones, and it's not clear where the curse of the Hesse Darmstadt comes from, but the court jeweler points to the strawberry tiara as the culprit. The tiara was designed by Prince Albert, husband of Britain's Queen Victoria, for their daughter Princess Alice to wear on her wedding day. But before he could see her walk down the aisle in it, Albert died of typhoid fever at 42. Alice wore the tiara at her wedding and brought it to Hesse, where exactly 17 years later to the day of her father dying of the disease, Alice died of typhoid, but not before watching one of her daughters suffer and die of it as well. Alice, like Victoria, carried the gene for hemophilia, and through her daughters, Alice passed it on to the Spanish and royal families with tragic results. Perhaps none of that was down to a curse on the strawberry tiara, but then in 1937, 5 members of the Hesse ducal family were flying in a relative's wedding when the plane crashed while they were trying to make an emergency landing. Everyone on board was killed, and the strawberry tiara was recovered from the wreckage in one piece. This time, a curse waits 10 generations. Nepal had become a sovereign nation in the 1700s, ruled by Prithvi Narayan Shah, and there are 2 stories for how he became cursed. Both begin with him coming across a supposed hermit. Either the hermit offers the king food, which he refuses, or the king offers the hermit a bowl of curd, which he eats and then tries to exorcise vomit on the king, who obviously moves out of the line of fire. Either way, the hermit is actually revealed to be the god Gorakhnath, and he was pissed. So, King Shah is told his line would fall after 10 generations. Horrifically, on June 1st, 2001, the then King Nepal Birendra Bir Bikram Shah Dev and most of his family were together in their palace. For reasons that are still not clear, the Prince Dipendra, the king's son and heir, entered the room loaded with weapons and killed 9 people, including his father, mother, brother, and sister. Dipendra then tried to take his own life and ended up in a coma for 2 days, during which, because of how monarchies work, he was officially Nepal's king by default. Dipendra then dies and the crown is passed to Birendra's brother before Nepal ended its monarchy in 2008. It lasted exactly 10 generations. How a curse of twins led to Zulu defeat? Maybe. The Zulu people had a belief that twins were cursed, and Makabi and her sister Mamana were allowed to live because their father, King Jama, who loved his precious daughters too much, he just couldn't fulfill that obligation. His subjects were not impressed and proceeded to blame everything bad that happened to the Zulu on the curse the sisters carried by being alive. They even blamed them when their own mother died, which was bad news for the clan, seeing as she hadn't provided a male heir before her soul's departure. Makabe continued to buck tradition. When her father died, she became regent for the young half-brother that she had, even though no woman had ever held that position before. The Zulu called her a bloodthirsty despot, but she did step down voluntarily when her brother was old enough. 20 years later, his son, Shaka Zulu, Mayabaki's nephew, would ascend to the throne. Shaka was both a very successful king and a very, very, very violent person. He had a thing for killing his own people by the thousands for no reason. So, Mugabe, she arranged for his brothers to kill him. As he died, legend said he cursed the Zulu. "You will never rule this land. It will be ruled by the sparrows, who will fly across the sea and build their nests high on the cliffs." It's said this curse brought the oppressive white invaders that overthrew the next king, and the curse of Mugabe led to the curse of Shaka, which led to the defeat of the Zulu. If she'd shown mercy, perhaps she'd be spared. Death of 3. "Just as you have fired, in the same way one day you too will be killed," said Swami Kapatri on the 7th of November 1966. Since 1965, millions of saints in India had started a huge movement to enact laws on cow killings and cow protection. Indira Gandhi promised to do this as a prime minister and received blessings from the Hindu saint Kapatri. She never did though, so on November 7th of 1966, Gopashtami, the most sacred day for worshipping a cow as per Hindu calendar, a huge crowd of Hindu saints and Gaurashkas staged a peace protest in front of Parliament to demand a ban on cow slaughter and were attacked by the police force, resulting in the death of 5,000 plus Hindus. Indira Gandhi's government deployed an estimated 5,000 buses and trucks to remove any eyewitnesses, refusing to shoulder any responsibility for the attack and blaming it on the Home Minister. This is when Karpatri, devastated, curses her to die the same way she let the Hindus die that day. True to his word, Indira Gandhi is killed by her own bodyguards, the exact same way. And now, I hope you are ready for some curses on curses on curses. Pelops, he's going to marry the princess. He offers a servant a night with her if he helps kill the king. Naturally, it's a total double cross, and once the king is dead, the servant is ordered to be executed by Pelops. So, this basic-ass servant curses Pelops' entire family and even backdates the curse to splinter reality. Tantalus questions the Olympics god's powers and kills his son, King Pelops, and feeds him to the gods while saying it's ox. The gods go, no it's not, and then he's the one cursed to stand in a puddle and he can't drink it, and then he's under the fruit he can't eat forever in the underworld, thus the word tantalize. Third generation, Pelops had 2 sons, Atreus and Thyestes, who then kill their half-bro so they don't gotta share the kingdom with them. Thyestes starts sneaking off with Atreus' wife, so Atreus cooks his sons and feeds them to Thyestes. What is with this family doing that? Atreus himself fathered 2 sons before he was killed, named Agamemnon and Menelaus. They married Clytemnestra and Helen, who gets kidnapped and causes the Troy War. On the way there, Agames talks crap about Athena, who stops the wind and strands them at sea. Only answer, Agames has to sacrifice his daughter. He does so to the horror of his wife, and the wind returns and takes them to Troy where they win the war. Orca concubine Cassandra, cursed by Apollo for not wanting to bang him, foretells his wife Clyte will smoke Agam for this, which she 100% does. Then Cassandra dies too, as foretold. Agam's son, Orestes, comes home to his sister Electra, now the 6th generation of the curse. Persuaded to avenge their father, he commits the horrible Greek crime of matricide and is so shunned by everyone he starts being tormented by fury demons. Within the day of her mother's death, she learns her betrothed took his life, so Electra does the same. Orestes is now completely alone, praying to Apollo. The god suggests, hey, take it to Athena for intervention. They put on the first trial in history in Athens. The jury voted. 5 voted guilty, 5 voted innocent. Athena broke the tie in Orestes' favor, and with that result, it seems the curse is now done. Orestes returns home to his kingdom to take his father's throne. However, he never marries and has no living family, so the curse of the House of Atreus ended with him, even if Athena hadn't sided with him.
Number 10. No one's ever really gone. You may have heard that said when losing a family member, a pet, or in the worst Star Wars movies ever made. Sorry, not sorry Disney, those are terrible. But perhaps there is someone who is never really gone. Genghis Khan. Yes, that's right. The ruthless Mongol warrior who conquered so much in his time that we're still talking about it today. So why is this big bad warrior still with us today? Well, that's because of DNA. Yeah, in his time there was lots of activities going on, besides the usual pillaging the village and unaliving those who oppose you. There were a lot of happy endings, let's say, and by that I mean forced non-YouTube friendly conduct bedroom happy endings. So much so that when a study was conducted back in 2003, 8% of men in Asia were thought to be descendants of the mighty man himself. 0.5% worldwide. That doesn't sound like a lot, but we're talking about millions of people here. Next time you go out, you may be brushing shoulders with the warrior's kin. Prepare for battle! Number 9. Henry again? Boy, it's really hard not to talk about this guy. But dude was kinda down bad for it. He's just most well known for his mistreatment of his wives, and by mistreatment, I don't mean getting into a fight over whether or not the toilet seat should be up or down and then having a very toxic argument in front of family members. No, because when Henry was upset with marriage, he wanted divorce, which honestly was kind of taboo for the time. Oh yeah, and he also beheaded 2 of his wives because that's how it goes. I know every couple has their issues to work out, but for most dads out there, having sun-drenched beer-fueled weekends, they never go beheading after that. Although, Dad's been staring at the lawnmower for a while and there's a lot of blades on that. Dad? While it is true King Henry VIII did behead 2 wives, he didn't do it to all of them. And at some points we're honestly quite pleased with his holy sanctity of marriage. Anyone who's ever been married can tell you how peaceful and sacred that bond really is. Number 8. The People's Princess. Okay, I know Prince Charles isn't exactly a king, but he is royalty, and the man kinda did Diana dirty. That's a quick and half put together allusion to a Michael Jackson song for the English majors and the audience. Being royalty isn't easy. Being royalty in a modern age when paparazzi overwhelm you with lights and cameras just for a juicy piece of gossip like, when was your last bowel movement? Is it slow? Extra extra, read all about it, the princess is constipated. That's just not fun. So after Prince Charles and Princess Diana had been married for a few years, you can understand how excited the media was to find out about their marital disputes. There was 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded, was a quote by Princess Diana that gave the media a field day. Sadly, Prince Charles was having an affair, and it wouldn't be too much longer that Diana would perish in a car accident that may or may not be organized by the royal family themselves. Number 7. Midlife crisis. This one's kind of generalized because if I didn't, I'd have to mention almost every king ever. So here we go. Back in ye olde times, the access to better healthcare just wasn't there. Doctors aren't washing hands. Imagine, Buddy eats some greasy mutton and then says, "Alright, time for your enema." But those aren't the only greasy hands around certain orifices I'm talking about. I'm talking about kings marrying older girls at the ripe age of 12. Yep, that's right. Nothing says experience in womanhood like being 12. People didn't live long, and oftentimes these arranged marriages had ulterior motives, like alliances or business really. However, that does not make up for marrying a 12-year-old who may or may not have started those super weird changing times, like when you were 12 and now there's hair showing up in places that you didn't know there could be hair. I sent a courier to the chief and he came back with this message. It ain't it. Number 6, till death do us part. Love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage, but sometimes the crooning words of Frank Sinatra aren't enough to keep people in love. Sometimes marriages end up like the ones we see on sitcoms, but when there's no laugh track, it's not very funny, and sometimes divorce is the answer. Medieval Germans thought this too, and something they practiced was divorce by combat. Basically, the man goes into a hole with his arm tied behind his back and the woman is free to move around with a sack of rocks. These proceedings are strange, as I'm sure no husband or wife married today would ever get so frustrated with one another that they would want to hit one another on the head with rocks. Oh, the blessings of being married.
At number 5, sucking toes. The British royal family are considered celebrities. I mean, with the amount of time people spend obsessing about their every move, I'd say that they're 10 times more famous than the Kardashians. They don't need their own reality show for people to keep up with them. People just do it. With this obsession with the royals, obviously comes paparazzi trying to get the latest scoop on members of the family and what they do in their spare time, as well as who they're canoodling with. This was how Sarah Ferguson was exposed for seeing other men shortly after she and Prince Andrew separated. Sarah was photographed topless on a beach with a man named John Bryan, and it could have just been a juicy story by itself, but things got weird when pictures were published showing the man sucking on Sarah's toes. This again wasn't a good look for the royals, and the queen was pretty mad about the whole situation, but I'd like to look at the bright side of this. Think that this John Bryan guy had a pretty good time throughout all this. I mean, he got to suck royal toes and be published in the newspaper. Sounds like a pretty lit time for him.
Number 4, party time. British royals are people of high esteem, morals, and cut from a higher quality of cloth. So when members of the royal family are seen partying too hard, well, it's a bad look. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was one such royal. He became known for spending his evenings in the best hotels and ballrooms that money could buy, even sometimes wandering into venues that were a tad tawdry even by today's standards. What's more interesting than that is the prince living the life of a frat boy is that his promiscuous relationship with not only just women, but men as well. Add in substance abuse issues that would make Charlie Sheen blush, and you've got yourself one wild prince. Yet again, there's some private letters that seem to support such wild accusations. Unfortunately, he passed away in a plane crash that is shrouded in mystery, and the royal family is suspected of having a hand. Foreshadowing much?
At number 3, the milkman's son. By far the most scandalous royal relationship of modern times was without a doubt Prince Charles and Princess Diana's marriage. We all know how messy their relationship was with the love triangle, the affairs, and Diana's confessions of how tough it was to be married to Charles. But one of the other pretty juicy secret scandals that surrounded the couple was the speculation that the couple's youngest son, Prince Harry, wasn't even Prince Charles's biological kid. In a tell-all interview with Princess Diana in 1995, she admitted to having had a 5-year-long affair with a military man named James Hewitt. After Diana's passing, people started speculating that perhaps this James character was actually Harry's biological dad. I mean, when you take a side-by-side look at James and Harry, their resemblance is pretty uncanny. James denied all allegations, and the royal family did the same, but this still remains one of those royal secrets that I'm sure everyone believes, but just won't admit.
Number 2, stepbro? Yeah, I know it's gross, but the truth of the matter is none of us would be here if it wasn't for a little inbreeding. Royals just tend to turn that dial up to 11. Back in ye olde times, bloodlines had to be maintained, and the only way to keep them pure was to marry cousins and have children. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are both related to Queen Victoria, but the crazy bus doesn't stop here. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were first cousins, and they had 9 children together. This is a tradition that all royal families practice. Of course, marriage back then was more of a business decision or a political one. It's why certain distant cousins end up ruling different monarchies and empires. Sure, I get it. Why cross the street when you can cross the hall? But at some point, you gotta run out of cousins. Let's just be glad this practice is of the past and stays in the past.
At number 1, long lost family. The royal family is known for trying to make themselves look perfect in the eyes of the public. They are always trying to look poised and put together and without flaws, but this effort also comes with its dark side, and there's a dark royal secret that just shows the lengths that they have gone to make people think that they are all just perfect people of society. It turns out that the queen had secret cousins that very few people knew about. The royal family and everyone adjacent are very well-known people, so how did we not know about the queen's cousins? Well, that's because they were essentially shunned and shipped off elsewhere because of their mental states. Back in the 1940s, mental disabilities were not very understood and were often seen as embarrassing for the families of the people who had whatever disability. The royal family thought that these cousins, Nerissa and Catherine, were too embarrassing for the royal family to keep around, so they had them incarcerated in a mental institution and they remained there for the rest of their lives, cut off from the rest of the royal family. It is said that no members of the family ever came to visit them. Now that is not a way to treat family.
Number 10, Prince Harry. Rotten, off with something familiar. Prince Harry. I feel like this man needs no introduction, especially if you were watching the news, say, around circa 10 years ago. The now married and humble prince was quite the partier back in the day. I'm sure our editors can find a safe for work image out there somewhere. A couple wild parties in beautiful Las Vegas had the royal family a little concerned, and when people say they're a little concerned, it means they're really concerned. At one party, he was stark naked. What? I know, right? It was weird. I kind of remember that actually. And another where he was wearing a certain uniform from a certain time in Germany that would raise a few hands and eyebrows. You know what I'm saying? Thank goodness he's cleaned up though. He's doing a lot better now and he's married to the very beautiful Meghan Markle. Listen, Meghan, if it doesn't work out, you call me. You and I we'll make it happen. You and I, a great husband. I'll help. Number 9, Prince Edward VII. The spoiled prince's spoiled prince. He's a man who had everything just given to him. The poster boy for silver spoons. Being the son of Queen Victoria comes with benefits. The second Eduardo was born, he automatically became a prince, a duke, and an earl of a couple of titles. In comparison, when I was born, it was a cold Canadian morning, and my family was watching through a glass screen at a brand new sweet babe. When one of my family members was holding a double-double said, "Why does he have 3 arms?" I'm just kidding, I don't have 3 arms, but the point I'm making is that I, like many others, simply weren't born into the good stuff. We had to do this thing called work. I know, right? It sucks. Edward lived a life of luxury until becoming king in the early 1900s. The only thing I've been king of is the playground. And that's just because I was big and I pushed everyone off. This isn't my slide. I don't think you get off. Number 8, Prince Charles. Alright, put your tinfoil hats on here, folks. We're going right into it. Okay, so Prince Charles, son of Elisabeth. It's the 1980s. Life is good. Ladies' formal wear has padded shoulders for some reason. Eddie Murphy is wearing red leather, and Milli Vanilli is an acceptable art form and not a fever dream of the past. Good times. So Prince Charles does the most 80s thing ever and marries the most beautiful princess ever to grace us mortals. I mean, come on, look at her. She was gorgeous. So it makes sense that you'd want to leave the most beautiful princess in the whole world after having 2 kids, right? Okay, but how? How do you leave Princess Diana? How about perhaps, maybe, kind of, sort of, might have been plausible that Prince Charles organized her car accident, which resulted in her passing. For him, Princess Diana was a warm-up. Oof. For others, she was an inspiration and a conversation starter for middle-aged women across the Midwest.
Do you remember where you were when Princess Diana passed away? I do. I was eating cheese at the kitchen table.
Number 7, George V. Honestly, this one could be number 1 on the list, but it's just so strange. Okay, so for those that don't know, George V, Nicholas II, and Wilhelm II were all cousins. Who were these royals I'm talking about? Well, these are the men who were in charge of their respected empires during the early 1910s. Why is George on this list? Well, in a nutshell, George and his cousins had the opportunity to de-escalate a very chaotic political situation in Europe. Old feuds were reignited by the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, and fingers were being pointed. Fingers quickly turned into guns, and hence WW1 had started. Not a great situation to find yourself in. WW1 was kind of a bad one. Imagine your family having the power to stop a major global catastrophe and doing nothing. Nice! Number 6. The Tsar. Being a prince turned king is hard. It's even harder to be a czar. I'd ask Nicholas II, but he ain't around anymore. Being a wealthy czar for a people that majority of don't have anywhere close to the same luxuries as the rest of Europe is even harder. There's a lot of things that can be said about the czar, especially his negligence for the Russian people. However, one event kind of sums up the whole thing. Imagine for a second if you were a poor Russian serf, working day and night for nothing, when all of a sudden a new czar says, "Come on down, folks, I know you're hungry, come enjoy some fresh hot pretzel and perhaps some beer." Since this was the best food a lot of people were going to have for a very long time, people rushed the grounds, and this stampede left over 1,000 people lifeless on the fairgrounds. The Tsar's response to his little strategic mistake? Party with the French royalty and not acknowledge his poor planning that had caused a major catastrophe. Oh, how many people? Hey, let's go party, come, let's go, hey.
Number 5 is Charles the Mad. There's many crazy rulers named Charles. Maybe it should have been written off as a royal name at this point. But this Charles may have been mad because of schizophrenia, which nobody in his time would have understood or treated accurately. Honestly, much of the same can be said for multiple rulers on the list, as their afflictions were caused by mental illnesses and not always by the fact their parents were also their aunt and uncle. Charles didn't really become crazy at any given point, rather grew into it. He believed he was made of glass, liable to shatter at any moment. To prevent himself from shattering, the king had iron rods sewn into his clothing, the world's first Iron Man, so suck it, Tony Stark. In 1392, Charles attempted to kill his own friend and then got confused as to what was happening while he did it. Coming to, he thought someone else had jumped his friend, so he took an army after the supposed perpetrator. Then he falls back into the same weird state he was in when he tried to kill his friend in the first place and cuts down 4 of his own men. The others have to drag their king from the horse to get him to stop, at which point he enters a catatonic state and has to be wheeled back to the castle in a cart. They concluded that he was probably just under a lot of stress, as it was the first time Charles had really shown signs of not being totally right in the head. In the following years, Charles would go through episodes of forgetting people's names, including his own, and the fact he was king, when he wasn't running through his castle pretending to be a wolf and howling at people. He was later removed from power for acting insane, but not dethroned, since Charles the Mad lived for some 30 years after his first fit of the crazies, while his brother started a civil war for his throne. Number 4 is the Zhengdi Emperor. This Ming Dynasty ruler is one of their most notorious. Unfortunately, not for good reasons to end up on this list. Speaking of, if you're enjoying, maybe take a second to subscribe to The Hive to stay up to date, because we have plenty more lists like this. The Zhengdi Emperor was renowned for both his foolishness and his cruelty, despite making some major campaign and political decisions that benefited his country. When he wasn't, well, the emperor played pretend. He built a whole fake city block on imperial grounds where he would pretend to be a shopkeeper, to the puzzlement of his subjects who were forced to go along with it. Occasionally, he pretended he was an army general despite having no experience or expertise, and went on raiding parties where he'd almost get captured. And he'd make the entirety of the army dress in all silk for some reason while doing this. Weirder still, this emperor invented an alter ego he named Zhu Shu, whom he would order on these said pointless raiding parties, to the exasperation of his government, who had to pretend they weren't just talking to their own emperor in a wig. Ming-era novels such as The Zhengdi Emperor Roams Through Jiangnam cast the emperor as a foolish and gullible man, at one point enjoying a bowl of rice gruel he believes to be made from cooked pearls. Number 3 is Maria Eleonora. Desperate to give her husband an heir, Maria of Sweden had a slew of pregnancy issues that drowned her in postpartum depression and anxiety, on top of the court pressure to even produce a girl at this point, just something as an heir. This was a lot for her mentally, so when she finally did succeed in producing a child, a girl named Christina, she completely lost it. The postpartum was too much for this queen, who screamed that she hated the dark eyes and the hair of this girl, and woed over not having a son, and that God was punishing her. Meanwhile, the girl's father was wearing a big hat, cigar in hand, and grinning ear from ear. Christina had to be kept from her unstable mother, who couldn't be trusted alone with the girl after some sketchy incidents occurred. That changed when her husband, King Gustavus Adolphus, who was happy to have a daughter, was battle less than 2 years later. Maria Eleonora responded with hysterical grieving. She shrieked in despair. She was inconsolable, lamenting her cruel fate to be robbed of the light of her life while they were still both so young. That grief, however, included keeping her husband's body above ground for 18 months so she could periodically touch it, cuddle it, and kiss it, you name it. All the while, she made Christina sleep under a golden casket that contained her father's heart. But their relationship improved after that, and miraculously, Christina grew up to be a functioning woman and queen. Number 2 is Mustafa of Turkey. This is one where crazy can't be blamed on the dude himself or the parents being siblings, but rather the classic Sultan tradition of locking the royal family away in cages to keep them from usurping the throne. Mustafa I was locked in said gilded cage for 10 years and was actually spared the usual fate of death by his elder brother Ahmed. After his brother died heirless, Mustafa's released from his golden cage, but then he's sent back just a few months later when his brother's son took the throne instead. Apparently, Mustafa was very neurotic from living in fear of sudden death while locked in a box for 14 years. When his nephew was in a coup just after 4 years, later in 1622, Mustafa was once again dragged from the safety of his cage to have the crown plopped on his head. He was frequently found running through the palace, knocking on doors and screaming for his dead nephew to come back and rule Turkey again. Many doctors treated Mustafa, but his condition only worsened. He was often seen talking to imaginary people and fed coins to fish and birds. What completely convinced the viziers that something was off was when, during a court meeting, Mustafa yanked on their beards and tossed off their turbans as part of a fit. He was dethroned after 3 months of rule because he refused to bed a woman and concerns for an heir flourished. That, and he was nuts. Number 1 is George III, who made it 28 years before he was first hit with his mental illness in 1788, which we now believe to be a case of acute porphyria, anxiety, hallucinations, severe pain, nausea, vomiting, palpitations, high blood pressure, numbness, muscle weakness, brown or red urine, and blindness are some of these diseases' many symptoms, and they were once all found in this wacky king. I said it first hit in 1788, and it hit hard. The king was gibbering for hours on end and foaming at the mouth. Symptoms deemed serious enough for a bill to be drawn up in Parliament for his son, George I, to become regent. Before the bill could pass, George, the initial one, recovered from his senses, and all was well with the king for the next 11 years. He had a small relapse in 1801 and 1804. Then in 1810, his mental illness came down hard, and it never left again. This intelligent, polite family man had turned into a raving lunatic. A visitor to Windsor was astonished to watch the king bury a stake near the castle, believing it would grow into a beef tree. Another saw the king trying to shake hands with an oak tree, believing it to be the king of Prussia. His doctor, Francis Willis, believed the root cause of the mental illness was overexcitement and intended to cure the king by strictly controlling his behavior. If the king acted up, Willis ordered the servants gag him and place him in straitjacket and leave him to thrash around, making incomprehensible noises until he calmed himself down. When the king behaved himself, he was rewarded by being allowed to see members of his family. When he misbehaved, it was back into the straitjacket. Even mealtimes became a carrot and stick exercise. When George was bad, he ate mushed up food from a wooden spoon. When he was good, he got to use cutlery. The final blow came in 1810. Already almost blind due to cataract, the king suffered a final catastrophic mental breakdown that left him permanently gone. He would babble for hours, lost the ability to walk, and eventually succumbed to dementia. Towards the end of his life, he was incapable of understanding anything, such as the death of his beloved wife, and lived as a long-haired, bushy-bearded recluse in Windsor Castle until his death from pneumonia in 1820. Starting off with a classic, the Coburg-Kohari curse. One of the German branches of Queen Victoria's family were the Coburgs, who were famously cursed with more than hemophilia. Hungarian noble Antoinette de Kohari married into the family in 1815, and the bride's father persuaded the emperor to assign Antoinette the legal status of a man, allowing her to inherit his estates and whole fortune that wouldn't have gone to anyone in the male line. A monk named Brother Amerskius was one of the super distant male relatives outraged at losing potential inheritance, so the brat cursed her. The hardest hit was the royal house of Portugal and the Kohari branch of the Saxon-Coburg family. Her son Ferdinand's wife dies in labor. Then Maria's successor Pedro lost his wife as well. Pedro then passes away, and a week before one of his brothers had died, then a week after Ferdinand, his other brother, dies. Within 8 years, 5 members of this family are dead. Even Pedro's successor is plagued with misfortune, as are his children and Pedro's children. This whole family is killed in coups and inside jobs and tragic illness, right up to Prince Leopold in 1916, who pushes his lover to the edge, causing both of their deaths. The talk of the tabloids, Grimaldi witch curse. There are a couple different versions of the reason for the curse. Prince Rainier I abducted a Flemish woman who escaped, or she was a witch being burned at the stake by him. Whoever it was, they got revenge with the curse. Never will a Grimaldi find happiness in marriage. Prince Rainier III's father was gay and ended an unhappy marriage after 10 years to announce it. And while Grace Kelly and the prince were sold to the public as a great love story, the truth was he cheated on her a whole bunch before she passed in the 1982 car crash. Her daughter Stephanie, who survived the incident, endured several failed relationships, and Grace's other daughter, Caroline, had a tumultuous love life. With a divorce, her second husband who died in a speedboat accident, and her third husband, a prince, she now divorced. Perhaps taking the curse seriously, the current reigning Prince Albert III put off marriage for a long time, instead having a bunch of illegitimate children with various women before marrying Charlene Whitstock in 2011. It was super bumpy, seeing as she found out about some love children, called it off, and then he persuaded her not to. She could be seen crying throughout all of her wedding footage. It followed through the lineage until it started a war. Caroline's curse. May heaven and hell blast your happiness. May your family be exterminated. May you be smitten in the person of those you love best. May your children be brought to ruin and your life wrecked. And yet may you live on lonely, unbroken, horrible grief to tremble when you recall the name of Caroline. Yikes. That's the curse placed on the Habsburgs after Caroline's son was executed for being part of the Hungarian uprising. In 1853, Habsburg Emperor had to dodge attempts on his life, but he found love with Bavarian Princess Elisabeth. They lose one daughter to illness before Elizabeth herself passes after birthing their son. Archduke Maximilian, heir to throne, is sent over to rule Mexico, where he's beheaded by Mexicans and his wife sent to an asylum. The hopes of the emperor now became centered on the crown prince, who married Belgian Princess Stephanie despite being in love with Baroness Marie Vesteria. They're notoriously found dead in a hunting lodge in 1889, and it's ruled they've taken their own lives with no investigation ever done. The case is still known in Austria as the Mayerling mystery. I could keep going through generations of this curse, but I'll say it hits its crescendo with the killing of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and we all know what happens and what started that. Next up, the prophecy as promised. Amamalama placed a curse on the Raja Wadiyar of the Mysore kingdom in the early 15th century when he came to take her husband's throne. She had fled, taking her jewels to the nearby town of Talakadu, and when the officials came to apprehend her, she spoke a three-part curse before jumping into the Kaveri River to end her own life. The curse commanded Talakadu become a barren expanse of sand, and for the Malagangi, a village nearby the river, to turn into an unfathomable whirlpool. And she condemned the kings of Wayadar's family to not have any children for eternity. While the events don't play out exactly as she demanded, they came eerily close. Talakadu became a desert-like place. The river near Malagangi commonly sees whirlpools, and the Wadiyar family has only birthed male children in an alternative generation, which makes it difficult for kings to have direct heirs. Historian Dr. A. Verarapa explains that if we take a scientific view, there's no scope for a curse. But if you observe the Wadiyar family tree, 6 rulers since the 17th century have been adopted sons or nephews. The Wadiyars have too acknowledged this fact. But has the curse finally been broken? In 2017, India TV reports the current ruler, himself one of these adopted sons, and his wife welcomed the first Wadiyar baby in 54 years. It's one we all know, and we can probably sing, "Rah rah Rasputin warned them." The Romanovs were the last royal family ruling of the Russian Empire, and they had ruled the country for 400 years. Obviously, by the 20th century, it's about time for some change, and the Romanov dynasty was facing some serious challenges. I mean, we got World War I raging, famine and war-stoked aggression groups, and the Romanovs' only son, Alexei, was the sole heir and had hemophilia, which was a huge issue then. But Rasputin was able to keep the boy from dying on 5 separate occasions. Needless to say, from the perspective of the Romanovs, Rasputin was the only thing keeping the dynasty and empire alive single-handedly. Rasputin, however, issued a prophecy early in his life, before he even met the Romanovs. A vision that if someone killed him, their entire family would die with him at the hands of the Russian people. He made sure to be a broken record about this too. Well, his warning failed to discourage Felix Yusupov, who poisoned, jabbed, pew-pewed, and strangled, then drowned Raspy. And Felix was the cousin of the Tsar Nicholas of Romanov dynasty. Just like that, Rasputin's death was the end of the Romanovs, as just a few months later, the Russian Revolution swept the monarchy out of power, executing all of them and making Rasputin's prophecy come true.
Number 5, Meghan Markle, solo strut. Okay, back in May 2018, we all set our alarms, we woke up early, and we all watched the royal wedding, right? We sipped our tea in our pajamas and we pretended like we were there, right? Just watching, along with the other billions of people online. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, his new Duchess. At the historic wedding, Thomas Markle was just a no-show. Yeah, Meghan has walked down that aisle by herself in front of 1 billion people, watching at home or streaming it, and it was thought at the time that this was because of Thomas's health. See, right before the wedding, Thomas suffered a heart attack, right? Just days before, so of course nobody was upset. It was almost expected for him not to show up. But cut to a year later, we began talking again. Thomas and the Duchess are now not close, it seems. Thomas even spoke out against his own daughter at one point. There was a huge scandal where Meghan even spoke to Oprah, like Oprah and that big tell-all, and Meghan actually said to her father, if you tell me the truth about working with paparazzi, we can help. And he wasn't able to do that, and for me, has really resonated, especially now as a mother, end quote. So yeah, they're not talking, I guess, anymore, which more than fair. If my dad was working with the paparazzi, showing them private letters, I'd be a little pissed too. There's no way though, the guy can't even unlock his email, let alone sending one? No way. Number 4, Prince Charles and Princess Diana's divorce. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla Parker before his divorce from his first wife, of course, Princess Diana. Imagine having this is crazy. A princess? You cheated on a princess? That's insane. So in turn, Princess Diana addressed the relationship and what's happening during, that famous 1995 interview with BBC. She couldn't have said it better, if I'm being honest. Diana said herself, quote, well, there's 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. Yeah, end quote. There's no better way of putting it, I think. It's a pretty baller way of saying it. I don't know. I haven't said baller in like 13 years, but I'm like, you know what? That's a baller move. It's pretty gangster. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was busy looking at their directions, it seems. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only 1 year before her tragic car accident. Now later in 2005, Charles ended up marrying Camilla. Has anyone seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looked great in that movie, and now I want to watch it. Is it worth the watch? Let me know in the comments. I didn't see it go to theaters or anything. It kind of snuck by me while I was sleeping on all the good ones. Number 3, Prince Harry costume party. YouTube isn't a fan of some words, specifically one word that rhymes with Yahtzee, and it goes deep with history, as you could assume what I'm talking about. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, right? The Duke was always referred to as a bad boy, right? He was the bad royal, the bad boil royal. I don't know, I'm trying new shit here. But just how deep did these incidents cut? Well, before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology back in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from a costume party, and a few of them were in poor taste. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No, he did not. Did he dress up like a witch? Like a little witch, maybe with a nice witch broom? No, none of that either. No, photos leaked of him wearing World War II German soldier gear. Yeah, I can't say too much, but it was even equipped with an armband, a very bad armband. Again, I can't say too much, nor will YouTube allow us to show too much, but you understand what I'm trying to say. You remember. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way he wanted. He's a literal prince. And he does this? It's off-putting. Harry said afterwards, and I quote, I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone. It was a poor choice of costume and I apologize. End quote. Nice. Right from the heart. That's good. Really goes deep with the royal history. We love it. Number 2, Vegas getaway. Nice. Roll those dice. It's one thing to party like a rock star, but to party like a prince? What does that even mean? I gotta keep this Prince Harry train going because, well, now I'm mad at him, but there's even more photos from history that show what was really going down in the royal family, His priorities, dare I say. After that party incident, just 7 years later, scandalous photos emerged from Harry's Las Vegas trip. Yeah, I had a little boys' night, it seems. It turns out what happens in Vegas may just leak online for your entire family to see, and your grandmother. That's probably not a great time. These scandalous pics were taken during a strip pool game. Lovely, we like that. Make sure you call the right pocket while you're not wearing any. The scandal actually prompted St. James Palace to contact the Press Complaints Commission before the snaps even made their way to British tabloids. Yeah, they knew right off the bat they were fucked. They're like, can we call them? Can we send a pigeon? What's the fastest? And finally, number 1, Boy Jones and other attempts. Okay, being the queen and all in history, a security team is always needed, obviously. And during her reign, specifically Queen Victoria, there were multiple attempts to harm the young queen. First attack was in 1840. It was an 18-year-old man named Edward Oxford, and he fired towards the Queen's carriage. When Edward was accused of high treason, of course, afterwards, he was actually found not guilty due to, you guessed it, insanity. A couple years later, in 1842, it happened again. This time, 2 men fired at her, both also missed. In 1849, her carriage was attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, might I add, ran up and hit her with his cane. Victoria was okay, luckily, but of course she was shook. Then these incidents kept occurring again in 1842, 1849, and 1872. Attempt after attempt after attempt. But then things got a little worse and, dare I say, a little bit more weird. If you haven't heard of Boy Jones or anything that happened there, I saved it for last because it's so horribly creepy. A teenager stalked the Queen back in 1838 until 1841, and his name was Edward Jones. Edward Boy Jones. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once, right? Before Assassin's Creed came out, no idea how we thought of this. Guy just knows a route in, and he would break in and would hide under the Queen's sofa. That was his go-to spot. Or he would sometimes just sit on her throne. And one of the worst things ever, sometimes he would go through her drawers. He would go through the Queen's drawers. That's so gross. What? Like that's gross. He would steal her clothes until eventually and thankfully he got caught.
Not so British after all. If you're like me, then you're most likely not gonna be royalty. Although being a prince would be pretty cool, I just don't have the pure bloodline to be royalty, but neither does the Queen of England. When you think of old Blighty and her royal throne, you think of pure British descent, but you'd be wrong. The House of Windsor is actually Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which, if you couldn't tell, doesn't exactly scream tea and crumpets. The German-sounding name became an issue in the early 20th century due to the First World War breaking out against two-time war loser Germany. Britain needing to inspire its citizens to defeat Germany, which at the time it was really anyone's game, so to help inspire the people, King George V changed the name to Windsor. After all, it's kind of difficult to fight someone when you have more in common than differences. Not to mention that there were a lot of Germanic influences around, so really, it was a bad look and a great marketing decision.
At number 9, Charles the Tampon? Yeah, we're getting weird. Relationships are kind of weird. I mean, they can be great, don't get me wrong, but they have a weird side too. Every couple is different and they have their thing. Some have a show that they like to watch together, others have their songs, and some have little sayings that they've come up with. But those are the more tame quirks that some couples have. Others, however, can get very bizarre, but many of them probably can't add up to the strange things that have been said between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. As we all know, Prince Charles was first married to Princess Diana, and it's no secret that they had a pretty tough relationship. Theirs was certainly not a happy marriage, and they each had their own affairs with other people while they were married. During their marriage, Charles was still pretty hung up on Camilla, the woman he was told he couldn't have, and who was also married to someone else. This minor obstacle, however, didn't stop them from getting freaky, at least over the phone. In 1992, the year that Charles and Diana announced their separation, a steamy phone conversation between Charles and Camilla was leaked, and it was super weird. In the call, Charles was simping like no other, saying things like how he wished he could live in Camilla's pants as a pair of panties, and even expressed his desire to be Camilla's tampon. Like what? Charles, stop it. Ew. This leak became a scandal called Tampon Gate, and as you can imagine, this wasn't good for the royals. But I guess it still kind of worked out for Charles, since after all that he finally got the girl he wanted and perhaps got to live out his dream of being a box of Tampax or something. I don't know. I really don't want that mental image. Moving on.
Number 8. Comrade cousin? King George V and Tsar Nicholas II were rulers of vast empires in the early 20th century. You'd think the similarities between these two monarchs end there, but in reality, these two royal men were much closer than the public thought. Georgie and Nicky were first cousins. That's right, first cousins. Even though their respected empires were culturally different and separated by hundreds of miles, the two men were immediate family. Looking at images of the royals together doesn't require a DNA test to understand that they're related. They look identical and could easily be mistaken for twins. Unfortunately for Nicholas, when the Russian Revolution was in full swing, the Romanov family went into isolation after Nicholas abdicated his throne. While there were attempts to thwart the coup. Nicky's cousin wasn't the best aid. Just goes to show you that sometimes you can't rely on a guy who looks exactly like you because royalty has pretty messed up bloodlines.
At number 7, killer date. What is the worst date that you've ever been on? What kinds of weird people have you met through your dating history? I'm sure there are some pretty wild and crazy stories out there, but I'm guessing that very few of them would even come close to the insane dating story from Princess Beatrice and how she literally dated a killer. In 2006, when Princess Beatrice was 17 years old, she got into a relationship with an American playboy named Paolo Luzzo. Paolo was an arguably shady guy, judging by the fact that he was arrested on a manslaughter charge before getting with Beatrice. Paolo was accused of ending the life of 19-year-old Jonathan Duchalier after beating the guy to death. Yeah, what a catch, right? Shockingly, Paolo's charges were reduced to a less severe charge, and he still got to date a princess after all of this. He even broke his probation to go on a trip to the French Alps with Princess Beatrice. How he finessed life so hard, I have no idea. But either way, their relationship only lasted a short amount of time. I can't say it's a good look for a member of the royal family to be seen with someone with such a dark past.
Number 6. The Princess. The tragic loss of Princess Diana affected not only the UK but people around the globe. She was known for her courage and her willingness to help those in need, and had the nerve to speak her mind. Her shocking demise isn't met without controversy. In fact, it may be the biggest controversy of the royal family. There is some evidence that points in the direction that the royal family was behind her death. Diana had proclaimed to her guards that her car was having issues, and even stated in a private letter to her butler that she had some reasonable fear that her life was in danger. In a nutshell, the royal family disapproved of the princess's new lover, even though Charles had clearly been up to no good himself. So in order for Charles to remarry and stop the gutter storm and the tabloids that Diana was going to create, they maybe sort of organized the accident that did end her life. Well, good thing that's over, and after this, there won't be any more controversy for the family, right?
In our number 5 spot today, we have Katarina de Medici. Katarina was an Italian noblewoman born into a famous family. She was Queen of France from 1547 to 1559, with marriage to King Henry II, and she was the mother of 4 future French kings. It wasn't exactly surprising news that her husband, Henry II, had a lifelong affair with a mistress, but on his deathbed, when he was begging to see his mistress, Katarina refused and left him to die a lonely and painful death. Do I entirely blame her? No, but it's also a pretty heartless move, you know what I mean? The daughter of the queen, Margaret, was said to be rebellious, but her mother wasn't just going to let her get away with it. The mother and daughter would fight over the married daughter's extramarital affairs, and it is said that Katarina's scream could be heard echoing throughout the palace. One fight between the two even saw her locking her daughter up in a castle, never to see her again. In our number 4 spot today, we have Egropina the Younger. Roman Empress Julia Egropina of Rome was pretty spoiled. She lived a lavish life. Her husband was the emperor and she had a family, but that just wasn't enough for her and she wanted it all. Julia was quite ambitious and she spent most of her early life trying to dethrone her predecessors. She believed that she and her son had a claim to the Roman throne by birthright, so she tricked her way into royalty by tricking her uncle Claudius into changing the Roman law so that they could get married. Suddenly though, after they got married and she became empress, Claudius died. Could be a really convenient coincidence, or it could have been a totally planned hit. I'm not accusing anyone, I'm just telling you what the word on the street is. She and her son Nero went on to rule Rome from 49 to 54 CE. Julia stayed by her son's side for as long as she could so that she could hold on to her power, but eventually Nero got tired of his mother manipulating him and he had to force her out of power. Julia, as you could imagine, was furious because power was the one thing in the world she desired the most, and so she rallied a group of supporters to try and overthrow him, but the plans backfired and she was expelled instead. In our number 3 spot today, we have Maria Eleonora. Maria of Brandenburg, the Queen of Sweden, has quite a horrifying story that relates to the birth of her daughter. Apparently, Maria wasn't feeling the overwhelming joy of childbirth because although she was hoping for a son, she gave birth to a daughter, Queen Christina. Maria wasn't shy about her opinion. She apparently screamed that she was given a dark and ugly daughter with black eyes. Okay, it's kind of rude. She referred to her new child as a monster and apparently just absolutely did not want anything to do with Christina and would have rathered that she just didn't exist. Apparently, she even placed Christina to sleep next to the corpse of her father who had passed away. It's like a different kind of messed up. Things clearly weren't right with Maria. In our number 2 spot today, we have Queen Isabella. Isabella co-ruled Spain from 1451 to 1504 with King Ferdinand II, and during her reign, she had some pretty horrific views and feelings. She wanted to get rid of all Spanish Muslims and Jewish people from her kingdom. Sounds a bit like another evil ruler from history. In 1492, she ordered that all Jewish people either convert to Catholicism or get thrown out of the kingdom. She made them all come to Spanish court to either pledge their faith to Catholicism or get exiled from Spain. How horrible is that? The queen has also been attributed with establishing the Spanish Inquisition, which definitely is not a historical highlight. Both Isabella and Ferdinand are often said to have done great things for Spain, which in some cases is true, but at what cost
cost and for what reason? In our number 1 spot today, we have Ravalona I, the last queen of Madagascar. She ruled the kingdom for 33 years from 1828 until 1861. There is no doubt that she was committed to her kingdom and that she would do anything for it, but in this plight, she was cruel and violent. She initially came to power after the death of her husband, and once she had it, she was not letting it go. The queen was able to keep away the advances of the French and British, and she left the bodies of those who tried to attack out for display on the beach. In 1845, the queen ordered 50,000 subjects to build roads across the jungle for 4 months. They were meant to have this massive buffalo hunt. Well, she clearly wasn't thinking everything through, because 10,000 of those poor souls died of starvation and exhaustion, and not one buffalo was hunted. Some records of history state that she even had her own uncle executed in order to protect her power, and there is an even more gruesome story. Some people even state that she ended her own mother's life by starving her to death. That is some epic level of evil, if it's true.
Number 10 is Eric XIV. That's a lot of Erics to get to 14, and it's a lot of paranoia in his case. The Swedish king survived 3 years of ruling before he lost his mind, first taking the throne in 1560 and then having his life taken in 1577. In 1563, when the crazy struck, Eric became violent and paranoid, rubbing his nobility and court members the wrong way until he pulled a daring move, imprisoning the Stur's noble family for allegedly plotting against him. However, he quickly came to the conclusion that the incarceration wasn't enough and decided to have them killed instead. Eric himself participates in their grisly deaths, and after their death sentences, Eric wandered outside to the woods and disappeared for 3 days. This led to open conflict between Sweden's nobility and Eric, who was eventually dethroned and imprisoned by his despised half-brother John in 1569. The former king languished in prison for the next 7 years before being put out of his misery in 1577. Turns out Eric's paranoia may have been onto something. After the 20th century exhumation, forensic scientists determined Eric died from his pea soup being poisoned. Number 9 is the Glutton, a nickname for King Afonso, also called the Grinning Moron. A nickname he earned from doing things like wearing 6 hats at once, tiered Mad Hatter style, or because he visited all the nunneries around to offer himself up as a willing bedmate. This is also the king who famously saw his 2 older siblings die, and instead of crying, he cheered and went, "Hooray, now I will be the king of Portugal." All of this perceived madness allegedly comes from how Afonso was ill as a child, and it left him partially paralyzed and mentally unstable. Unfortunately, he found pleasure in violence, and this made for a bad combination, especially when a local boy named Antonio, who liked to whip stones at people, offered the king knives and said he should join. Afonso's mother tried to stop her son, who now went out at night and tormented the poor villagers and forbade Antonio to enter the palace. Deprived from Antonio's company, Afonso became completely unmanageable and refused to eat food like a brat, so they let Antonio back in. He soon established himself in a room next to Afonso and began to lead the king on nightly excursions, jumping respectable citizens and raiding taverns. This goes on for years until his mother dies and Antonio is sent away. Then Afonso focuses his attention onto food. At the age of 23, Afonso was incredibly large thanks to gluttony. He used to take his meals in bed and usually ate and drank so much he was sick afterwards. Ministers ruled on behalf of the screw-loose Afonso for years, but they still tried to make Afonso behave like a king. Told what to do, he did it. Told what to say, he said it. Still, his way of life infuriated the Portuguese clergy, so they find him a wife, hoping it'd calm him down. Instead, they annul, and she marries his younger, hotter brother, and the two begin planning a coup. In his final days, like many of the other monarchs on this list, he was confined. It was said he wore a groove in the floor from pacing since he couldn't do anything else. Number 8 is Notty King. Unlike Afonso, who victimized the nearby villages, France's King Charles IX actually went after others in his court, including his sisters and even animals. Charles had a disfiguring birthmark between his nose and upper lip, giving him the nickname the Snotty King, and he was given to fits of rage and sadism, though he was a mama's boy to his regent Katarina de Medici, who literally ran this country even once the king grew up. In 1561, at the age of 10, Charles took the throne after all eligible heirs had died, through no fault of his own. As he grew up, Charles became tall and physically strong, but his physical and mental problems increased with age, and as one suffered, so did the other. Charles was unbalanced to the point of insanity, and his anger was solved through violence or death that only Margot, his youngest sister, knew how to calm. If she wasn't around, someone would hand him a bow and arrow and say, "Hey, go hunt some deer nearby." However, things like hunting and field sports didn't satisfy his bloodlust, and that's exactly what it was, bloodlust. To quote Charles himself, he preferred to use the knife because he liked the blood and wanted to see it spurting out of animals. Shudder. So he fed this lust by dismembering domestic animals. He also liked to lashing people until they bled, or going down to the blacksmith to beat out weapons for his armory until he was prostrate with exhaustion. Then he'd go use them on more animals, or people. Number 7 is Fyodor the Bellringer, who was the son of Ivan the Terrible and wasn't thrilled about ruling and left most of it up to his brother-in-law Boris Godunov. This would-be ruler is remembered for having next to no neck and spindle legs that made him shuffle in a stooped manner. That and his glazed vacant gaze paired with a permanent gill-less smile that was variously ascribed to religious ecstasy or simple-mindedness, depending on the observer's point of view. Suffice it to say, even Ivan the Terrible knew his son was missing a few screws. So, anticipating his own death, Ivan had tried to smooth the path for his humbly gifted son by creating a 5-member advisory council to help him rule, which is how Boris ends up in charge. Because Fyodor didn't just not know how to rule, but he wasn't interested in doing so. In the 16th century Russia, feeble-mindedness was considered an especially inspired and childish form of wisdom, a foolishness in Christ. Apparently in the olden days, Russians characteristically looked at these persons with respect, if not reverence. This is why, unlike so many kingdoms on this list, Fyodor wasn't just tossed in a room and left to rot. Homeboy actually dies peacefully in his bed. Fyodor spent most of his time praying, visiting monasteries and churches throughout the realm, and of course, what he was named for, ringing the bells that called the faithful to mass. Number 6 is Maria of Portugal. She starts as Maria the Pious, the first undisputed queen regent of Portugal and the first monarch of Brazil, who spent the first 10 years of her reign as an eloquent and respected leader. Then 1786 rolls around and she needs to be carried back into her castle due to a random state of delirium that hits her. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the last. In 1786, Maria loses her husband/uncle, her eldest son and heir, her only daughter, and then her confessor consecutively. Maria had already been in a fragile state, but their losses caused her to nosedive into religious delirium, convinced she was going to hell for the sins of her father, claiming to see his black and charred corpse dragging itself along hallways of her home, or in her mind's eye, being tormented by demons. Visitors to her apartments would complain that they were tired of her constant screaming and wailing, which was only amplified by the bloodletting that was meant to cure it. According to some reports, she also became rather fond of wearing really tiny clothing.
Number 5, Till Death Do Us Part. Funerals are pretty expensive, especially a royal one at that. It takes a lot of power to dig and then carry around these massive caskets, which back in the day was even more exhausting because, we didn't have protein shakes or any food really. Joanne of Castile was born in 1479. Her marriage to the Duke of Austria was arranged, but she was very much in love during this time. When her husband finally met his fate in 1506 due to typhoid fever, Joanna would have his tomb unearthed over and over again and then reopened over and over because she wanted to make sure that he was still in there, that he was still dead. Now, of course, on one hand, yeah, I feel bad for the queen here. She was clearly not coping with his death very well, but like this, what a privilege, what a gross privilege this is. To have his tomb open and closed over and over again, she would make people carry around his casket everywhere she went. Sometimes she'd even keep it under her bed. That's creepy. See, ashes I could understand. That's like a one-man job to carry those around. A little less odd, but a 1,000-pound royal coffin? I also feel bad for the guards who had to cope with his death as well. They had to carry everything. They must have had one really jacked arm after that entire process. Number 4, a duel. A duel with a princess? What is this, Star Wars? What is this list? Hungarian Princess Pauline von Metternich was married to Prince Clemens. She was born in 1836, and she had to marry her uncle when she was only 20. So, yeah, surprise, surprise, she was a little unhappy. Weird, right? Who would have guessed? So since the marriage began, her husband was involved in numerous affairs. He liked going after actresses or singers, whoever. He barely paid any attention to her at all. That is until, she started to have a little fun in life. Yeah, then he's like, oh, how dare she? Yeah, once she got over this gross prince, she had a great time. She drank, she smoked, she defied convention, all things you shouldn't do, but most notably, her duel in the summer of 1892. Yeah, she challenged another royal, a countess, to a duel, in nothing but a corset. To this day, it's not yet determined who won this duel, but a princess dueling in the dark after some drinks? This is epic, this is wild. Imagine if this was a Disney princess instead of Sleeping Beauty. Are you kidding me? Parents would be like, okay, go off, queen. I'm on board. Don't look. Number 3, Ice Princess. Anna Ivanova, the Empress of Russia from 1730 to 1740. Okay, where to begin with this one? It's kind of chilly. First of all, Russia is a pretty cold place. This is coming from a Canadian. This next story sounds absolutely awful. In celebration of their victory over the Ottoman Empire, Anna Ivanova gave the order to build an ice house. An ice palace, rather. Of course it's a palace, a big glorious, the best of the best for a princess, right, always. 20 meters by 50 meters. Every corner was carefully crafted. Some guy was just like licking the corners to make sure they weren't sharp. There were intricate decorations all over, like ice trees, ice birds, yeah, you get it, a lot of ice, it was an ice thing. Everything was made out of ice. How magical is that? Hope you brought your non-slips. Princess Ivanova arranged this to celebrate the marriage of one of her maids and a prince. These two didn't know each other prior. They were then forced to marry each other in a freezing cold palace, and then they had to ride an elephant. Again, in a freezing cold palace. And all the guests were forced to attend the wedding dressed up like clowns. Yeah, this is pretty awful. Nothing like the film Frozen at all. Way different of a princess. Different Anna. Number 2, Heart of Glass. Alexandria of Bavaria, the 23-year-old Bavarian princess who believed she was made out of glass. Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun to deal with? Imagine that. Alexandria was also quite the scholar at the time. The young 19th century princess was into reading and literature, all that good stuff. But she also believed that when she was younger, she had swallowed a tiny glass piano. So if she were to move around too quickly or bump into anything, she was afraid her inner piano would shatter into pieces. Do I think this is a princess being spoiled? No, not at all. This was probably an undiagnosed psychological condition. But at the time, everybody was like, oh, she's just fragile, she's noble, she's a noble glass lady. No, she literally thought she was made out of glass. This is a problem. The glass delusion was common in the Middle Ages, but again, so were barbershop dentist surgeons, so, you know. And finally, number 1, Isabella of Spain. Going back to the 15th century to Queen Isabella of Spain, we're getting pretty nasty for this number 1. For queens to brag about their wealth, status, their man, you name it, is normal. But to brag that you've only bathed twice ever in your entire life, that's an odd flex. Okay. Well, way back in 537 AD, Rome had 11 aqueducts that ran to over 1,000 public fountains and over 900 bathhouses. It was quite important, but then when invading Goths came in and, cut them off, the Catholic Church had no idea how to fix the problem. So instead, they just started telling everybody that bathing was a sin only practiced by pagans. Yeah. But it's not a sin? Hitting that thumbs up. There you go. You made it through the entire awful dark list. But kicking off the list at number 10, must love licorice. Okay, we'll start off a little tame. Napoleon Bonaparte, the famous French emperor, the famous military leader from the 1800s. Napoleon Bonaparte was responsible for conquering a large part of Europe. Bet you didn't know he was obsessed with licorice though. Way too much. He would eat this all day, every day. Ugh, it feels gross. Look, as somebody who can't stand licorice, I already feel bad for Josephine. Licorice breath at any time of the day coming your way? No thank you. I'll hard pass. Napoleon carried licorice around with him at all times. This guy ate so much of it, his teeth became stained. They turned black. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, it's black licorice too. Not the strawberry pull and peels, those are great. I'm talking about 1800s black licorice. It would come in lozenges. If somebody offered me a lozenge and it was black licorice, I'd call the police. Smack it out of their hands. Number 9, George IV. When it was time for King George III to pass on the crown, of course, next in line, heir to the throne, is his eldest son, also named George. What if you became king in 1820? Would you be noble? Would you do monologues in the sunset as you enriched your homeland? Kings like to do that a lot with their, if I had the hair still. Or would you do what King George IV did and make horrible financial decisions every single day? The guy would just party all day as well. He would gamble every day, he would buy expensive stuff that he did not need, and on top of that, he would never do any of his royal duties. Guy wouldn't do his job. His father had to step in, classic. He figured the only way to settle all these new debts set in motion by George IV. In order to clear those up, George now has to marry his cousin, Caroline of Brunswick. The arranged marriage happened April 8th, 1795, and what was supposed to be a happy day for all was a nightmare for all included. They hated each other as soon as they met. I mean, obviously, he was a fool. George got heavily intoxicated for the wedding. He was just hammered the entire time. And then 9 months later, almost to the day, they had a child. And then right after that happened, they went their separate ways. So yeah, horribly unhealthy relationship. Once George became king in 1820, he then tried to divorce her. Like, what a fool. Just let it go. Let it all go. Let her go. Number 8, Filippo Maria Visconti. The Duke of Milan during the 14th century was at first Gian Maria Visconti, but after he was taken out, his brother, Filippo Maria Visconti, had to step up to the bat. As a ruler, Filippo was better. His brother had been cruel previously, hence the untimely departure. So this was a good move at first, so we thought. Now Filippo had to take over come 1412. Filippo was better than his brother on paper. He helped reorganize government finances. He got the silk industry up and running, which we love that. He ended up passing away of natural causes down the road, which is, nothing like his brother. But while he was in power, he never showed his face to anybody, not even people close to him. He hid in his palace most of the time, and it was odd because he thought that he was ugly. That's why he hid his face. Kind of sad, right? Filippo hid his face, and maybe you feel bad for him now, right? Just a little bit. He died of natural causes and he was alone all that time. Yeah, don't feel bad for him. This guy was horrible. He was jealous of his wife Beatrice Lascaris de Tenda because she was twice his age, twice as smart, and twice as powerful. So Filippo had her taken out in a courtyard publicly September 13th, 1418. Yeah, he accused her of adultery just cause he could, and he had some suspicions in his dark room by himself hiding his face. History is ugly, and sometimes it's literally ugly as well. Number 7, George I. King George I, couple of Georges on this list, okay? Long before his British ruling days, George was in Germany. He was actually the elector there, and he'd been married before around 1682. Originally, he married Sophia Dorothea of Seal, but the entire time they were married, it was horrible. George would straight up bring other women home because he just felt like he could. He literally argued that he could, given his role. He's like, oh, I could have these women and we could do all this in front of you. Of course, I'm this person of this. Like, no, you're a fool. You're a jerk, really. He would have numerous mistresses and he would purposely flaunt them. So Sophia thought, okay, if you can have numerous side hustles going on, I'll move on myself. So she began seeing a Swedish count. Okay. She began seeing Philip Christoph von Königsmark. Now when George inevitably found out, he was violent at this point. He was upset, he divorced Sophia and then imprisoned her. Yeah, when he became king of Britain later on in 1714, she didn't come with him. Yeah, it's not just horrible with Sophia either. The Duke had also been taken out, sadly. His love for Sophia ended up getting him killed. What a mess. All these Georges are so messy, the worst. If your name's George, don't be a mess. Just be nice. Hit that thumbs up if you're a George. Change the game. Change the stats up. Number 6, heir to the throne. Okay, I kicked out this list roasting Napoleon and his licorice choices, but of course, he's done much worse things than have bad breath and stained teeth. Napoleon's marriage to Josephine was first fueled by love and friendship, but things quickly changed. Marie Josephine Rosé Tascher de la Pagerie was born in 1763. She had 2 children with her first husband, but that marriage was also not a happy time. They separated, and Josephine met Napoleon in 1795. Napoleon at this point was married at the time, and they had an affair, and they were deeply in love, like actually in love, and Napoleon proposed to Josephine in 1796, and they married later that year. 2 days after their wedding, Napoleon led the French army in Italy, and while he was gone, both of them ended up having affairs. So many affairs in this. Like, does love even exist? What the hell? 1804, Napoleon crowned himself and then crowned Josephine, proclaiming her empress. A few years passed, and after finding out Josephine couldn't bear any more children, Napoleon made a list of possible and eligible princesses. Just a list, and just left it out. Like, how awful is that? In November 1809, Josephine agreed to the divorce, and come 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte's final word on his deathbed was Josephine. Yeah, a little darker than a licorice, just a tad.
At number 5, the horse and his boy. On the less violent end of the spectrum, Jahangir was actually a big fan of the arts, science, and worldly things. Unlike his father, who couldn't read and write, an interesting skill for a ruler not to have, Jahangir was all about it. He really wasn't interested in military, which was a task he left to his son. But he did inherit his father's wealth, and considering he wasn't working in the military, he had time to indulge his curiosity. In his memoirs, there are fantastic paintings of exotic animals. There's a painting of a zebra that has a very funny story behind it. The zebra was being taken as a gift to the Safavid Shah, and it was traveling through the port of the empire. Jahangir heard about it and had it brought to court first, and didn't believe that it was real. He thought that it was a painted horse, so he had people try and wash them off. Only when the paint didn't come off did he realize his mistake and ordered that the wondrous creature be painted. At number 4, Shah Jahan and the Taj Mahal. Okay, so this one isn't messed up for violence or anything, but it is the ultimate love story, and we just can't leave it off this list. There is one part that is messed up to me because, man, I don't even know, but We will get to that. If you've ever been to India, then one of the stops you made on your trips was probably to the Taj Mahal, a breathtaking mausoleum built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan to commemorate the love of his life. Considering how big and intricate it is, you know that their love was bigger than any storybook. An Indian poet called the Taj Mahal a teardrop on the cheek of time, a testament to grief and power. Mumtaz Mahal was Shah Jahan's favorite wife, forsaking all of his other wives just to be with her. They went everywhere together, even on military missions. This is where, from my perspective, where things get crazy. This woman delivered 14 children for her husband. 14. Sadly, whilst giving birth to the last, she passed away, inspiring her king to build this massive structure. Both Shah Jahan and his love are buried beneath it. At number 3, brothers at odds. Shah Jahan's rule was considered the golden rule of the Mughal Empire, so how do you top that? Aurangzeb did not even bother trying, and he kinda sucked. He was Shah Jahan's third son, and he was a very military-minded man, showing tactical and strategic military skill and unrivaled determination. Whereas his brother was a man of letters, and no, not the kind from Supernatural. Aurangzeb wanted power, and so in order to secure his rule, he confined his ailing father to his own palace, caused the death of one of his brothers, and had 2 more of his brothers, a son and a nephew, executed. He was literally committing fratricide left, right, and center. But it didn't matter to him because he gained control. His desire to prematurely end the lives of those who stood in his way was described as, quote, a wolf thirsting for the blood of his brothers, end quote. You would think that this motivation to gain power and rule on his own terms would mean that he had big plans for the empire, which in a way is true, but those plans and changes led to a lot of oppression, but we will get to that in a bit. At number 2, staked. Before we get into the oppression that Aurangzeb caused to his empire, let's talk about Emperor Farrukh Siyar. Farrukh Siyar was emperor of the Mughal Empire from 1713 to 1719. He was described as an incapable ruler who gave his power to all of his advisors. His rule caused many conspiracies and plots to arise within the court. He caused a lot of people a lot of pain for his plight for power. With the help of his allies, he gave many of his enemies the gift of the big sleep, but by far the most ruthless thing he did was kill Jahandar Shah and Zulfikar Khan Nusrat Jung. What made their deaths so brutal was the fact that when they went the emperor hung their heads on poles, and just to add insult to injury, he made their parents walk at their funeral. Luckily for the people of the Mughal Empire, Farrukh Siyar was killed by unknown assailants at the instructions of his close relatives, putting an end to his awful reign. And finally, at number 1, the Great Oppressor. Aurangzeb's rule sort of had 2 chapters to it. At first, Aurangzeb was a capable ruler of a mixed Muslim-Hindu empire who was feared yet respected for his vigor and skill, but around 1680, Aurangzeb's rule changed drastically in both policy and attitude. His once unified people of both Muslims and Hindus broke apart, and people of Hindu faith became subordinates, not colleagues. On top of that, Aurangzeb added some more oppression to the mix and not only destroyed Hindu temples, but he also reimposed the jizya tax on non-Muslims, after the tax was initially banned by Emperor Akbar. For the first 20 years of Aurangzeb's rule, he did not impose a tax, but all of a sudden he started demanding these payments, and historians believe that Hindu uprisings are what caused the emperor to act harshly towards the non-Muslim population. This discrimination caused a revolt to unfold that Aurangzeb's third son supported. Aurangzeb spent his last 50 years taking his aggressions out on the Hindus in the empire, and it's for this reason that he is remembered by many as a tyrant. Before we wrap things up for today, I want you guys to leave a comment down below telling me what from this list you think was the most messed up from these Mughal kings. Leave me your thoughts down below.
Number 10, snake eyes. Well, not exactly snake eyes, but after extended use of belladonna drops in the eyes, you would probably wish that a snake bit you in the eyes. Belladonna is poisonous. It's a no calzone, red flag. But yet it was still used by Egyptian royalty. Basically, the drops of poison would dilate your pupils, and that would be considered to be beautiful. For some reason, I guess, okay. Extended use of the drops had terrible side effects for the user, blindness being one of them. You gotta remember, folks in this time have no social security, and the best doctors can do for you is tell you to go take a bath in crocodile dung. And to pray to the gods for more, I guess. Sure, okay. So to avoid that tragedy, go for the natural look and avoid the eye drops. You'll thank me later. Number 9, more eye stuff. Thought I was done with the eye stuff? Well, guess again, amigo. I ain't done yet. I've got lots more to say about that. Okay, maybe a little. Eyeshadow and eye color. Some ladies today would say no special outfit is complete without it, and honestly, I have to agree, ladies. Sometimes y'all do some stuff with your eyes that makes me say, damn, you look good. Damn, you look good. However, some ladies might be cautious to slap some color on their face if they knew the origins of the product. As for the royalty of Egypt, eye makeup was in. Seemed to be a trend. However, they weren't so cautious of where their makeup got its origins. Egyptian eye glitter had two key ingredients: applicable powder and bugs. Yeah. You know the super colorful ones that are like really big and you wouldn't want to be around? Yeah, those, beetles, scarabs, and pretty much anything you could find. They would then crush them into a heavenly pulp and smear it all over their royal faces. I have issues with spiders and wasps as it is. I have no interest in wearing them whatsoever. I actually hate wasps. That's just, even just crushing up a bunch of, and just, oh, this is good. Oh, I love this. This is the best. Yeah, no, don't do that. Number 8, sweet traps. When you're royalty of one of the most successful empires and civilizations in human history, it means you ain't gonna lift a finger. Less than any other celebrities do today, probably. So what to do with all that extra time in your hands instead of living like everyone else? Well, how about a picnic? That sounds nice, actually. Sounds great, right? Except when we bring out all of our favorite treats, the flies and bugs bother us, and we can't look beautiful if we're covered in bugs head to toe. How did the Egyptians fix this, you ask? Well, it's simple. Don't let the bugs bite you in the first place. Basically, you get one of your forced volunteers, maybe a couple actually, and you slather the poor devils in honey, till they look like your favorite pastry from Tim Hortons. Place said glazed serving away from the picnic, and now you can enjoy it in sunshine and peace. The screaming of being eaten alive by bugs might dampen the mood, so just wear earplugs, it's fine. You stay over there and just get eaten, it's fine, no problem. No problem. Number 7, unhooded Sith. Circumcision is important in a lot of cultures of yesterday and today. Now at this channel, my job is to come out here every week and make you laugh. So to the men out there who still have their Jedi robes, imagine every day of your life you got sand in places that sand shouldn't be. Anakin Skywalker's worst nightmare, and honestly explains why he hates sand so much. But perhaps one of the reasons Egyptians used this hygiene service was to stop sand getting in their wiener's one-eyed bandit. There's no showers, nothing to really get it out once it's in there. That's no good. I guess you could take a dip in the Nile River, but there's too many crocodiles in there, and who has the time to jump in the Nile River when they're busy being forced to build large structures that will stand the test of time? So you better line up, fellas, or be cursed to feel like Anakin Skywalker for the rest of your life. The prequel one too, not the cool animated one, the one that whines a lot. That one. You don't want to be that one. Number 6, nice dentist. Turns out not all Egyptian dentistry is completely awful. It turns out they may have come up with the first toothbrush. Other civilizations had examples of one too, so it's hard to tell exactly, but the Egyptians had one. But one thing they did have over everyone else were Tic Tacs, or breath mints actually. Honestly, this makes a lot of sense. Imagine it was Valentine's Day, you just walked past a large pyramid. There's sand in places on your body where sand just shouldn't be. When you notice the smell of your breath, and it's something awful. But not to worry, because you purchased breath mints from the market. Yes, that's right. Now smooching with your Egyptian sweetheart can go on without a hitch. The mints were made from nice smelling herbs and mints, sometimes roasted over a fire to form little candies. An ancient Egyptian solution to an ancient Egyptian problem. Kinda like that one actually, kinda nice. Gonna put a mint in, it's kinda nice. Number 5, domestic disturbance. William the Conqueror was one down bad dude. The illegitimate ruler to the throne left a bad taste in some people's mouths, and was just as ruthless in silencing those rebellions that were always uprising against him as he was with the famous battles he was a part of, like the Battle of Hastings. But what I think he should be remembered by is the way he asked Matilda to marry him, or rather the extreme measures he took when she refused his advances because he was an illegitimate leader. William dragged Matilda by the hair out into the middle of the street and beat her until she agreed to marry him. I don't have to tell you how messed up that is, and I sure hope I don't. Number 4, Nero Sauna. The Romans were kind of a big deal, especially if you're into history. Large city, culture, and some other structures are still around today. That's kinda cool. But while the city of Rome may have been the best city on earth at the time, Romans themselves could use a little work. Meet Emperor Nero, the vicious leader of Rome who became emperor through ill-gotten gains. However, in what may have been one of the first acts of flexing the male patriarchy, the divorce or forced separation of his wife Claudia Octavia comes to mind. It was a rocky marriage from the start. There was a general dislike from the very beginning, but when Nero remarried, as emperors did, he had Octavia banished to an island, where shortly after she would be suffocated in a hot vapor bath. Her demise was sad for most Romans. Oh yeah, and they tried to make it look like she did herself in. That's messed up, man. Number 3, pedestal. I think in a healthy relationship, you ought to put your partner on a pedestal sometimes. Maybe your partner is drop dead gorgeous, a promising athlete, really enjoys collecting stamps. You go, little rock star, collect those presidential stamps. However, Emperor Caligula of Rome had some other ideas. He would literally put his wife, who he claimed to love, up on a pedestal stark naked and let his friends in the military gawk and glare at her. He would also say to her that he could end her life whenever he wanted and put a knife against her for no reason. Weird flex, but okay. This guy was awful to everyone as he tormented and unalived so many people. Well, you sure wouldn't want to see his face everywhere, as he liked to do just that. Built statues of himself everywhere because after losing your family to his tyranny and looking at his wife, you need to know who's responsible for all this. That's messed up. Number 2, Duzong Duzong Duzong. That wouldn't really be a great fraternity name, would it? Well, the Emperor of Duzong of China would think differently, as when he was in charge, that's pretty much what the royal court looked like. Enough drinking to keep AA in meetings for 100 years, and enough ladies of the evening to... Well, I don't have a joke for this one, but there were a lot of them, trust me. Having massive parties like that and enjoying the company of other women is not how you respect your wife. To make matters worse, it seemed that too much partying may have been a bad thing, who would have thought? As what he made up for in a fun weekend he lacked in governing, as the Mongols were at his front door, or gate rather. Eventually his empire would burn to the ground. All thanks to alcohol, and many women who laid down for their lives, literally. Number 1, side piece. Look, I enjoy the company of a woman just as much as the next king sits on his throne. But in my opinion, once you find a wife, it's time to settle down, relax. No more crazy parties like Duzong. This is another generalization, but every king did this. Every king in the past has had mistresses, as if that is a totally okay thing to do to your wife and oftentimes the queen of your kingdom. I'm a reasonable guy, so maybe I can see having your side piece waiting in the wings to be stage center, but it's never one, is it? It's always multiple. Ladies of the past, all I can say is make sure you give birth to a boy and watch your back. They're coming for you.
At number 10, the king of hobbies. Everyone has their interests, right? Like for example, I like video games, and I like watching people scream at their teammates for not helping everyone else out. I'm looking at you, Blake. For kings back in the day, they didn't have people on Rocket League to scream at, so they had to find other interests. For Tsar Peter the Great, he had a lot of interests, and they were all very bizarre. Firstly, he had an obsession with short people, especially dwarves. To him, they were like his real life dolls or something, and he would hold weddings for them and even hold lavish funerals, complete with small horses pulling a small coffin on a carriage, and even a very short priest to hold the ceremony. But other than this obsession with short people, he also dabbled a bit in medicine. He liked watching surgeries be performed like he was trying to be on Grey's Anatomy or something, but when watching the surgeries just wasn't enough for him, he would sometimes perform them himself. Now remember, he's not a doctor, so it's no surprise to learn that these surgeries rarely ever went well and people died. I certainly wouldn't trust him to give me any kind of surgery, but he was a king so he could do whatever he wanted. Peter the Great also loved dentistry. It is said that if you wanted to get all buddy-buddy with the king, all you had to do was let him pull your tooth. Sounds like the guy was one heartbreak away from starting his own medical drama, but in the worst way.
Number 9, banning coffee. This is the worst of the worst, people. Murad IV, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The guy banned coffee like an absolute monster. No more triples for you. He was born in 1612, and for the most part, his mother was ruling through him because he was so young. That's often the case with most of these young rulers. They just get, hey, you're 7, now you rule a kingdom, enjoy. It's tough, they're not gonna know what's going on. But when he got a little bit older, he put forth these laws, punishable by death, might I add, in order to get things back on track. That was the key. He banned coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. He would actually disguise himself as a civilian during the nighttime and would wander around aimlessly in hopes that he would find one of these dark roast renegades. If you were caught outside having a quick smoke break, you weren't arrested, you didn't get fined, but rather, Murad IV himself would take your head off right there in the streets. No trial, no jury, just straight to execution. All because you're drinking a Bud Light Lime.
At number 8, why you mad? Now this could be a bit of a controversial opinion, but if your name includes the words the mad, I would assume that you're not doing too great, right? I mean, you have to earn that title, and if it's a title that harsh, that simply begs the question, what in the HE double hockey sticks did you do to get that name? Well, for Charles the Mad, he did a lot. Charles became king when he was only 11 years old, so that certainly didn't help his development, and knowing this kind of helps explain a lot of his actions. He was known for getting really angry and throwing fits of rage, and was known to give people the gift of the big sleep, if you know what I mean. Charles didn't always kill people though, only sometimes. Other times he liked to switch things up. Sometimes he would run around his palace pretending to be a wolf. Other times he would go through phases where he just really didn't want to keep up with his personal hygiene, and he would get so gross that he literally had to be cut out of his own clothes. Now I don't know how long you have to go without bathing to get to that point, but really I don't think I want to know the answer to that question. Charles also thought that he was made of glass, and so he would go through phases where he would sit completely still so that he didn't break. Kind of like Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy, but not as, you know, extraterrestrial. Well, maybe he was. That honestly would explain a lot.
Number 7. Party hard. Zhu Huzhou was the emperor of the Ming Dynasty in the early 1500s. Now lately we've been talking about kings and queens, we're on part 2s for both now, and there's a good amount who simply just aren't ready, they're too young to rule. Like Joffrey from Game of Thrones. Kings like that actually existed, they were horrible. They were young, they were too young to know what was right and wrong. Plus they usually have some corrupt parents whispering in their ears the entire time. Zhu took the throne at just age 14, and for a while, ministers were confident that he would grow into the role and become the leader that he was born to be. Well, when he got older, he transformed a zoo just outside of Beijing. He transformed it into his own personal brothel. Yum. I mean, on one hand, I'm glad the animals are free, but like a zoo? You couldn't find a more romantic place? Can convert an Applebee's to a brothel, maybe? I don't know, something with AC? His final days were spent partying, and some would say a little bit too hard. He got intoxicated and fell from a boat. That's how he ended his life. Honestly, not a bad way to go out. Pretty OG.
At number 6, love game. A lot of kings and queens throughout history have been known to engage in the horizontal hustle a lot. I mean, when you're a ruler of a kingdom, you don't really have much to do in your spare time, so what else are you gonna do? Play a board game? No. These monarchs were getting busy all the time, but there was one king who was just so obsessed with getting a good old pickle tickle that it just became his whole personality. King Philip V was known to be a nymphomaniac, and he liked doing the deed a lot, but because at the time, the Catholic Church said that having sexy time with anyone but your spouse was a sin, the king and his wife were getting busy all the time. Eventually, his first wife caught on to how to use this to her advantage, and she would often refuse to sleep with him until she got her way with anything she suggested or demanded from him. You would think that he would catch on to this game, but maybe his urges were just so strong because he always caved and gave her what he wanted. Obviously, this man did not follow Hoodville. Absolutely not. Just to give you guys an idea of how obsessed this guy was, when his wife was on her deathbed, before she went he literally tried to get one last bang in. On her deathbed. Like, dude, not the time.
Number 5, Alexander the Great. The son of Philip II and heir to the Macedonian throne, Alexander was the star child, and while it's true it may have gone to his head, he did make it work for him. The spoiled prince became king at 20, which is very young in case you were wondering, and during his youth would create one of the largest empires the earth would ever see. He was undefeated in battle and likely one of, if not the best, military strategist of all time. More than 20 cities were founded in his name, including the great city of Alexandria in Egypt. I don't have any cities named after me, but I do have a cool nickname though. Do I want my own empire? Sure, why not? The Cheddar Empire sounds pretty sick. Nice, the Cheddar Empire, I like that. Do I want all the naughty war related stuff that he did? No, I don't want that. I don't like that. I'm thinking more like a comedy empire, stand-up tours, movies, and of course merchandise. That's how you know it's real, folks. You get quotable t-shirts, that's how you know it's real. Don't sniff your own farts, that's a good t-shirt. Some of you would wear that, I know you would. Number 4, Suleiman the Magnificent. The prince turned sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire, probably the most famous of all the sultans, and for having a really big hat. For real, that's a big boy. That's a big boy right there. No, he's actually known for taking the Ottoman Empire that was good and making it great, plunging it right into a golden era. Successful military campaigns and some law reforms made him stand out. Speaking of standing out, is his collection of ladies of the evening. This is the bad part. where it stated that he had 17 personal ladies to service the mighty royal in his time of need. Yes, this did produce offspring, and yes, this did make things confusing for who is next in line. Number 3. Mansa Musa. Nothing says spoiled like being the richest man of the ancient world, maybe even of all time actually. A royal who rose to power and exploited his nation's salt and gold mines, which in return made him quite wealthy. Net worth is estimated to be in the $400 billion range, but it could be a lot more, we're not sure. I don't know about you fine folks, but when I get some extra cash in my pocket, just itching to get out there, I go head down to the mall. Sure, mall culture isn't what it used to be from the 80s, but I gotta hit up the Gap, man. Good sales. But that's exactly what Mansa Musa did. However, he went to multiple cities, and when he went shopping in said cities, he spent so much money that he upset the economy of said city. That's just such a baller move, dude. Damn, alright. Okay. Number 2, William the Conqueror. The illegitimate child. A man who most likely would not take the throne since there were others in line. So what does William do? He says, nah, right, I'm the Duke of Normandy. That's Scottish, but we're gonna go with it. I'm the Duke of Normandy, I don't have to take this. Thus began the Norman Conquest, and conquest William did. From the Battle of Hastings to all the other lovely things Williams did, he was the spoiled prince who didn't take no for an answer. What's the lesson in this one? See things through? Or being born into an intertwining European family is complicated. Sometimes swords can solve things. Number 1. Mohammed bin Salman. Here's a modern prince for you, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. There's a lot that can be said, but all that you basically gotta know is that the family, the royalty, is very rich. Arab oil rich. Sure, the British royal family is treated like kings and queens with servants and whatnot, but these guys, whew, they live every day like that, and it is for sure more luxurious than old Bly. Dude's got money, it's rich. I'd love to visit though, it looks like a cool place, I don't know, we'll see.
Number 10. King Edward VIII. Directly after his father died in 1936, King Edward VIII took the throne, right? That's pretty normal. But the tides quickly turned when, less than a year later, he renounced his position. Now, this was of course a huge scandal right off the bat. This is not something that's taken lightly in the royal family. Turns out the woman responsible for stealing his heart was that of Wallis Simpson, America's socialite who had already been divorced once before and was at this point working through her second divorce. So you can only imagine how everybody reacted at that point, right? Oh, how dare she? His proposal to Simpson, of course, caused social and political backlash. The Church of England wasn't so chill with Edward marrying someone who had already been divorced. Yeah, they're not really okay with that. So Edward was forced to abdicate. Yeah, he had to, right, for love. Edward and Simpson then tied the knot in 1937, and they stayed together until Edward's death much later in 1972. Sliding into royal DMs right off the hop. Okay, we're in for a treat. Number 9, dark predictions. Of course, in recent years, the royal family has seen a change that many didn't really expect. When Harry and Meghan chose to renounce their royalty status, speculation began that this could be the beginning of the end for the monarchy. People only fueled their fire with questions, and also, somebody may have called it. Yeah, Nostradamus, he may have predicted this entire event. One of his predictions literally reads, at the end of the war, the great powers change. Near the coast are born 3 beautiful children. They will ruin the town when they come of age, they will change the kingdom, and they will not see it grow anymore. Now, Harry is only one of 2 children, so I'm not sure if the, quote was talking about him and his siblings, or if it has more to do so with some other royal family members, but either way, there's some people who take Nostradamus' words very, very seriously out there, so I had to include it. Maybe there's something there, I don't know, maybe there's something we haven't quite breaking down yet. That's why we need National Treasure 3, maybe this is the plot. Number 8, King Henry II. While we're on the topic of him, could Nostradamus have actually predicted the death of King Henry II? Because if he did, that's pretty curious, I'd say. Never used the word curious in my life, but I'm like, you know what, that's curious. King Henry II was actually a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be kind of cool, being friends with Nostradamus. I'd be like, hey, how does Game of Thrones end? Please. While at one point in history, Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible King Henry of France, unfortunately, Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death, might I add, at age 40. Yeah, in the summer of 1559, not a great time. A terrible jousting accident went wrong and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I have to explain because, it's history and, well, that's what we're here for. The jousting accident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and then his skull as well by one of his young soldiers. And the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one. It says he will pierce his eyes through a golden cage." Okay, already we're a little bit spooky. And that 2 wounds will ensure a cruel death. So I'm not saying he predicted it, I'm just saying kind of nailed it. Number 7, a fateful turn of events. Queen Victoria. Her reign began back in 1837 and it lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. Now, at just age 18, Alexandrina Victoria had to rise up to the throne. Had to, right? All these cases, it's like, yeah, they have to do this. She was born, of course, on May 24th, 1819, and Queen Victoria was actually 5th in line when she was born, nowhere near the throne. So right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely that she would ever see the crown. But one by one, all of her family members began passing away fast. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed away, and then her father and her grandfather both died 1 week apart from one another. So on one hand, obviously it's sad, it's tragic, everyone's dealing with loss so fast. But on the other hand, by time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next up to bat for the throne at 11. Imagine, that's like some ancient Egypt. Number 6, the Great Irish Famine. The Great Irish Famine took out many people. Back in 1845, potato crop that a lot of the Irish population relied on were suddenly no longer available. See, a group of microorganisms wiped them out, and in result, around 1 million folks died or had to leave. Now, it was draconian law and British ruling at this point that made the exported food hard to reach people. That's where things stopped. This famine led to Irish independence, of course, and anti-union movements, and the show Victoria pulled back 0 punches in 2017, where an episode showed the true happenings behind the Great Irish Famine and the role that Queen Victoria played in coming to the aid of her then subjects. It was the death of at least 1 million people. This was a very dark 7 years in Irish history. Historian Christine Keneally spoke out and says, quote, "There is no evidence that she had any real compassion for the Irish people in any way." Yikes. That's a historian saying that. That's how you know.
At number 5, no bathing. These days, bathing is kind of a necessary thing. You gotta be clean, you have to smell nice, you have to practice proper hygiene. But back in the olden days, this was the complete opposite, and nobles rarely ever bathed, and it was kind of a trend. Over time, physicians began to believe that bathing was dangerous, and obviously the nobility tried to protect their lives and well-being at all costs, and so they just stopped bathing. In a popular 16th century medical book, it was advised, quote, "Use not baths or stews nor sweat too much, for all openeth pores of a man's body maketh the venomous air to open and for to infect the blood," end quote. So yeah, they thought that taking a bath would make you sick. In the late 15th century, Queen Isabella of Spain would go around bragging about the fact that she had only ever bathed twice in her whole life. Weird flex, but okay. King James IV apparently never bathed, and his hygiene was so bad that he passed on lice to other people who went into a room that was frequented by the king. He also never washed his hands before eating and would just rub his fingers with the wet end of a napkin. These people were gross. At number 4, prankster king. You know that you're a spoiled king when you can pull pranks on people constantly and never have anyone try and stop you or fight back. This was basically the life of King Christian VII of Denmark, who was known for being pretty childish and playing pranks on people his whole life. He was a troublemaker through and through. He was known to play pranks on his grandmother by putting pins in her throne, and he would throw things at her, and he even ran through the streets with his friend and his mistress, destroying shops and patronizing brothels. He even made his own torture rack, had himself tied to it, and flogged. Why? I have an idea, but I don't want to think about that one too hard. One of the other weird things that he was known to do was leapfrog over dignitaries when they would bow to him. This guy was really quite immature. At number 3, saints in bed. I understand the desire to feel protected by whatever gods or saints you might believe in. That's one of the whole points of religion. However, I think some people can take that idea a little bit too far, and by some people I mean the Spanish royal family. These guys took religion very seriously, and they believed that following religion heavily would allow God to heal them when they were sick. So, when a member of the royal family was ill, doctors would remove body parts or even entire corpses of saints from churches and monasteries and would put them in bed with the person who was ill. Yeah, they slept with the corpses of dead saints to be healed of their sickness. Could you imagine if that was still how medicine was practiced today? At number 2, rat court-martial. There has been a record of many kings throughout history who were complete children through and through. Even though many of them grew into adulthood, they still acted immature, and one of the greatest examples of that was Peter III of Russia. He was not a good ruler or a good husband to his wife, who would later become Catherine the Great. Peter spent every night in bed with her playing toy soldiers because he was obsessed with his little royal dolls. He was so obsessed, in fact, that when a rat chewed the head off one of his toy soldiers, he was so upset that he held a proper military court-martial for the rat. He proclaimed the rat guilty of treason and had it hung in a tiny gallows that he had built for the occasion. It was weird, but in the end that bizarre event helped Catherine overthrow her husband, so I guess it kind of worked out for someone. And finally, at number 1, groom of the stool. Guys, I found the worst job in history. You think working at the 1-star Domino's Pizza in your neighborhood is bad? Wait until you find out about the groom of the stool. The groom of the stool was a job created during the reign of Henry VIII, where the role was to monitor and assist the king in his bowel movements. They would carry around a commode at all times, and they were also tasked with monitoring the king's diet and meal times, and would organize the king's days around his break times. They were also tasked with undressing the king for him to do his business, and it's also been suggested that they would have had to, quote, cleanse the royal posterior as well.
In our number 10 spot, we have Irene of Athens. Starting off this list today, we are heading back to the Byzantine Empire. Irene of Athens was the mother of Constantine VI, and while the pair co-ruled together for almost 2 decades, things ended in quite the tragedy. After the pair co-ruled, Irene did go on to rule on her own from 797 to 802 CE, but you might be wondering how she managed to outrule her son. Well, Irene, the ambitious ruler, wanted full control all to herself, so she asked for the help of some political allies to pull off a scheme against her own son. She began to lead a conspiracy against him to try and get him out of power. The duo did end up reconciling their relationship, but this is not where the story ends. In 786, the public began to turn their backs on Constantine because he had decided to divorce his wife and instead marry his mistress. Irene saw this as a second chance and once again chose to conspire against her own son. Honestly, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, this lady did not care. Here's where things in the story get exceptionally gory. Irene not only ordered the arrest of her son, but also ordered that his eyes be gouged out. Yep. That's how good old Mumsy came into power. In our number 9 spot today, we have Elisabeth Bathory. Elisabeth was a Hungarian noblewoman who lived from August of 1560 to August of 1614. She was born into one of the oldest and most powerful families in Transylvania, and she was well educated and ran various estates and bore many children. Oh, and this is all happening while she was also killing young women and bathing in their blood. Yeah. Weird, gross, terrible. Elisabeth is known for killing her servants and bathing in their blood as she believed it would keep her young. Guess no one told her about moisturizing and minding your own business. All accounts of Elisabeth remember her as a terrible, evil person. It is said that her number of victims most likely ranges somewhere from 175 to 200, but some claim it might be as many as 600 people. It is no wonder she is referred to as Countess Dracula. In our number 8 spot today, we have Olga of Kiev. Olga of Kiev became queen regent in 945 CE after her husband was killed, and during the time her son was just too young to rule. Olga knew that once her son was old enough to be crowned king, her power would be taken away, so she needed to see her wishes carried out before that happened. Her wishes included the capturing and killing of those who took the life of her husband, which was carried out using scalding hot water. Yeah, don't even want to imagine what that would have been like. Don't kill the king, I guess. Historically, it doesn't seem to work out well. Apparently, in doing this, however, Olga developed a bit of a bloodthirst, and she would not rest until everyone associated with the people who killed her husband were all eliminated. She is the ultimate ride or die. It seemed like if you even looked in the wrong direction or breathed in the vicinity of someone who had something to do with the king's slaying, you could kiss your own life goodbye. Olga took hundreds of people out of the tribe that the killers were from. She devised a plan to bury the tribe leaders alive, and she even came up with a plan to set fire to their entire village. It is said that Olga may have locked the tribe's leaders in a bathhouse and burned it down, but we don't know for sure. All we do know is that she was not okay. In our number 7 spot today, we have Wu Zetian. Throughout the long and storied history of China, there has only ever been one woman who held supreme power, and that is Empress Wu Zetian. Of course, considering this historic feat, she wanted to ensure that she kept her power by any means necessary. She had all of her rivals killed, so anyone who could possibly overthrow her or come for her seat on the throne was eliminated. The Empress ordered the execution of the previous Empress as well as members of her own own family. She had multiple methods of taking these people out, and rumor has it that she even had her own grandmother and 2 of her grandchildren killed for going against her. It didn't matter who you were, if you threatened her power, you were done for. It is said that after a while, the Empress decided to do a little less killy and a little more lovey. Yeah, apparently she started spending more time with her lovers, using some aphrodisiacs. You know, we all are a little crazy when we're young, but as we get older, we all crave the simplicity and just someone to love. Right? Of course though, people don't forget, and they were sure to exact their revenge. The people fought back and ended up having all of her lovers killed, and the Empress herself was exiled. You know what they say about karma? She does not miss. In our number 6 spot today, we have Mary I. Queen Mary I didn't get the nickname Bloody Mary from nowhere. Oh no, this name was certainly earned. Mary was a Catholic queen in a Protestant country, which, as you can imagine, was quite problematic when she ascended the throne of England in 1553. Although her reign only lasted 5 years, she made a mark on history in a multitude of ways. She was the first true Queen of England, and she was quite a vicious ruler. During her time as queen, Mary announced a war against Protestantism, which left many who belonged to the religion being charged with hearsay. Doesn't sound all that bad until you learn that at the time, the usual sentence for hearsay was to be burned at the stake. Nice. Mary was responsible for the burning of over 300 Protestants during her time as queen, which unsurprisingly left her quite unpopular.
Number 5. What? I didn't have any corn! Austin Powers reference for you. You know the character I'm talking about, I can't say it. Here's a hygiene product that just makes me question life. The very fabric of our existence. Whether it was the Big Bang or the almighty creator, there's just no way this was ever meant to happen. It doesn't make any sense. One day, somebody was walking along the Nile River and was unfortunate enough to step in crocodile droppings. Now, most people would say gross and move on. Oh, no, not the people of ancient Egypt. They felt the stinky, squishy unholiness on their feet and said, yes, we must bathe in this. And they did. They took the forbidden mud bath, the brown tsunami, the cesspit of no hope. You can call it whatever you want, really. It's horrible either way you look at it. Supposedly, it was meant to keep you young and beautiful. My only question would be, at what point did they realize poo baths were a mistake? Was it when they were smelling it and it was bad? Or was it when it accidentally got in your mouth or something like that and you're just like, oh what, what got that out of my mouth? That's the Scottish Egyptian, in case you were wondering. Number 4, waste removal. This one is kind of a broad stroke, but hear me out. There's no plumbing, no waste removal, and people kind of just go wherever they want. A lot of that unhygienic waste is kind of just laying about. However, the people of Egypt also had the advantage of the Nile River, which means they use that bad boy for everything. Transport, irrigation, a water source, and of course, a bathroom. Which, in case you didn't know, your source of water and irrigation should be 2 separate, they shouldn't go together, that's not good. This is a good explanation for the plagues of Egypt, besides the sin, bad sinners, no sinning. As years of that kind of negligent waste management are liable to make any pharaoh sick. Don't mix your water with the poo, don't do that, that's bad, don't do that. Number 3, sunscreen. This should come as no secret to anyone out there, but with my rosy cheeks and fair complexion, I would not do very well in the suns of ancient Egypt. Honestly, I don't know how Luke Skywalker lived on Tatooine with those twin suns. Without a little copper tone action, you know what I'm saying? The Egyptians had an answer to that problem, however. Not the whole living on Tatooine part, that just kinda sucks no matter what. Blue milk is weird. They had a makeshift sunscreen using rice bran extracts and a few other ingredients that were meant to help protect against the sun's rays. How effective was it really? Not sure, cause the only stuff I'm willing to test out is the real stuff. And if I get burnt, then I start peeling. And then somebody has to rub aloe vera all over me. Be right back, I'm gonna get some sun. Number 2, cursed craft dinner. You've got no plumbing in your palace, and it's time for dinner. So how does an Egyptian royal make his favorite pot of KD without water? I mean, if college kids can do it in their dorm room, surely they can master the art of post-secondary cuisine. Well, for some unlucky folks, it means taking a pot and walking down to that old Nile River. Almost like people rely on water or something, and take a big scoop of water and bring it back. But while you begin to scoop some water, you may notice someone is picking up crocodile dung. And people are bathing in the water. And to your left, there's a maiden washing clothes, and to your right, there's a man doing something I can't repeat on YouTube. Oh well, time to scoop some more water up and consume this clean, nice water at home. Oh, this is the best. Tastes like the village. It's nice. Number 1, pink milkshake. Does it still count as hygiene if you ain't breathing? I say yes. Besides the pyramids and maybe the Nile, mummies are the most famous things about Egypt. And in a weird way it is hygiene. Hygiene for the afterlife. When someone super important passes on, it's time for a little game of operation. Stomach, liver, intestines are removed and put into jars. You never know when you might need that next. The heart is left because it's the heart, and the Egyptians were die-hard poets, so you gotta souls in there, you gotta keep that. The most grim process to me, however, is turning the human brain into a forbidden milkshake by mashing it with a small spike and then draining it out in what must have been the grossest waterfall ever. Oh god, oh god, that's so gross. Anyway, then you take some linen and start wrapping the mummy up like a dad wrapping last minute gifts on Christmas Eve. Bada bing, bada boom, there you go. Buddy is prepped for the afterlife. Don't mind me, I'm just gonna be sick from the brain milkshake. Ooh.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Princess Urraca. Princess Urraca of Zamora. This first one, honestly, it feels like a Game of Thrones episode. When King Ferdinand I, aka Ferdinand the Great, aka El Magno, finally met his fate back in 1065, he split his kingdom up into 5 parts, equally for all of his 5 children. This was modern day Spain, so it was quite a bit of land to give out. The eldest son, Sancho, he was pretty greedy. He wanted more land than he was left with. Typical Lannister. The guy had the biggest part of Castile as well, and it still wasn't enough. What a brat. Now luckily, his sister, Princess Urraca, was a badass. She stood up to her brother. She's the Arya Stark of the family. She's like, you know what? Nah, knock it off, pal. How does that sound? The princess sent in some hired help. Yeah, he was disguised as a negotiator, but really this guy was Ezio Auditore. This guy was from Assassin's Creed, the musical. He had a different agenda, you know what I'm saying? And just like that, the brother was no longer an issue. Yeah, how nuts is that? Families can get wild sometimes. Everybody's got that one aunt, no doubt, but this is some next level drama right here. No one does it like early Spain. Number 9, Clara Ward. Back in the late 1800s, since birth, Clara Ward was born into wealth. Her father was Michigan-born Captain Eberbrook Ward, Michigan's first ever millionaire. He had shares in steamships, Great Lakes. She didn't need a royal husband at all, but she wanted one. And she knew as soon as she saw him. The young prince of Caraman-Chimay, member of the Belgian Chamber of Deputies. Clara Ward would sometimes visit the family mills, you know, make it look good, shake a few hands, laugh at some jokes, see where the fortune comes from, all that jazz. But on this one day, she crossed paths with said prince. And it was love at first sight. He was there for trade, but when he left, he brought back a wife. And the common folk were not having it. Nope, they were not on board. People were freaking out. A royal married a rich American girl? That's like 4 red flags right there. She was the talk of every town at this point. It didn't help that Clara was happy either. Yeah, how dare she? Clara loved to show off her newfound wealth, and some loved her and stood by her image, others not so much. The marriage only lasted 6 years. Clara eloped with a Hungarian musician, and after her divorce, she modeled for a living. Now, I know I put spoiled in the title, but I'm really on board for this one. This is awesome. Princes, musicians, modeling, this is the dream, no? Number 8, Princess Colonus. Most of the time, these marriages are chosen. Women are forced to marry some gross, fat old dude, and while he's cheating and eating lobster and being nasty, the wife has to stay, have kids, raise said kids, and be dutiful. It's a horrible deal. So for the Spartan princess from the 3rd century, she too was forced to marry Cleonymus, this older, horrible man. He was so horrible, he wasn't even allowed to have his father's throne at this point. They were like, maybe we shouldn't do this. That's how bad he was. So Colonus thought, this guy sucks, the system sucks, I'm gonna go talk to the much more pleasant Architatus, son of King Arius I. So around 272 BC, both of these warriors, now both her lovers, they went to war. Colonus was ready to leave it all behind if her husband won. This really was the final standoff, and he could not win. He was horrible. Luckily, her husband did not succeed, but we also have a Princess Colonus to thank. Imagine she stayed in this horrible relationship and just didn't say anything or didn't fight back. It would have been bad for everybody involved, not just her or her family. Number 7, Princess Margaret. This next princess partied with rock stars during the 60s. Yeah, might ring a bell. The Queen's younger sister was known as the Rebel Princess. Like in Star Wars, I guess. She was the talk of the town for years. Scandal central, my friends. God forbid a royal had a good time with cool people in the 60s. She passed away in 2002, but we're still talking about her love life. For example, Pablo Picasso moved to California in 1955, and he said there's only one possible bride for him, the 24-year-old Princess Margaret. Also, yeah, Pablo Picasso is way more recent than all of you thought, guaranteed. She always had the spotlight. Her wedding was the first ever royal wedding to be aired on TV. That was May 6, 1960. And in 1968, word had spread that the princess had an affair with a nightclub pianist, Robin Douglas Home. And then come 1973, paparazzi got photos, proof of Margaret hooking up with a landscape gardener on her private island. Yeah, how dare she do things on a private island? Where did they even get these photos? Like through bushes? These guys are crazy. And one of the most unusual facts surrounding Princess Margaret was that she was cremated. Yeah, she had chosen to break tradition so that her ashes could be shared in the same tomb as her father. Yeah, all these acts historically are unusual. They're unheard of, to party that often, publicly, to break vows, and then even after death still break tradition. To that I say kudos. The woman lived her life the way she wanted to. This is a life lesson, my friends. Unusual acts when it comes to royalty, yeah, we'll talk about that and have a good time, but it's also fair to mention that Princess Margaret also supported more than 80 charity organizations in her lifetime. Yeah, we don't talk about that one though. Number 6, Queen Victoria. If I'm eating, don't acknowledge me as a human being. I sound like an animal when I eat. When I'm really diving in, like holidays, I'm not a human, I'm an eating machine. I don't waste any time, I love food, and if you're a queen and you can eat fast, well, everybody else has to eat at the same pace as you. How lovely is that? This began back in Queen Victoria's time. The queen loved to feast and she didn't waste any time at all. The way the royal family works is that when the queen is done,
you're done.
Doesn't matter where you are in your meal, if she just puts her cutlery down, everything is going, and then the next course will come in. You can even have one bite, you could be like, okay, here we go. And then it's gone, just like that. All because she could eat a lot of food in a short amount of time. Hurry up, slowpoke. Also, once the queen gave a toast, you couldn't even speak at that point. Yeah, just right down to business, just eating food, that's it. This food would be taken away at lightning speed, so you better get what you wanted fast. You'd only have like 2 minutes, really. I would just put food in my pockets, like it's all you can eat sushi. That's what I'll do. I'll never leave sushi behind, no matter how full I am. Never. That's one rule I'll never break. I'll pocket the rest, always. I'll bring a coat with allotted pockets. Save a few California rolls for the bus ride home, in case I get a second wind. Number 5, George V. We love hobbies here on BumbleBee. I mean, I used to collect special quarters growing up. I swear to God. The only time I've ever been good at saving money was when I was 12. I would see one of these and be like, don't touch it. George V turned out he loved stamps. A lot. Like a lot. Since he was a wee young lad, he was collecting these little guys. Here's the unusually impressive part about him though and his hobby. He continued to collect stamps during World War I. This guy was busy, everybody's trying to stay alive, and George is just licking stamps in the library like a prince. Like all collections, it started at an early age and now it's at the point where it's past impressive and it's just borderline strange. This guy had albums on albums of stamps. He had around 330 albums, each with 60 pages full of stamps. Quick maths, that's like 20,000 pages full of stamps. So naturally he was nicknamed the King of Stamps, or rather the King of Philately, the official term for collecting stamps. It's a nice word. Philately. Back in 1905, he set an all-time stamp record, which I didn't even know that was the thing, and it was the most money ever spent on a single stamp. The guy dropped like 220,000 US on a single stamp. Somebody even asked the prince down the road if he had heard about this idiot who spent 1,400 pounds on a stamp, and he was proud of it. He was like, that was me, you wanna see it? The next King George is a little different, to say the least.
At number 4, womanizer. I'm going to preface this by saying that George IV of England was voted as England's worst king by historians, so that should already tell you a lot about this guy. Georgie here was yet another one of those monarchs who was a little too invested in his intimate conquests, you know? Now we do know that the encounters that he was on were all consensual, so that's a plus. However, he was still creepy about it. Yeah. This man tried everything to get a woman to sleep with him. He would throw a tantrum if she said no, or threaten to end his life if he didn't get to do the 8-legged nature dance, you know? Somehow, this had a pretty good success rate, even though he was not a catch at all. It feels like this was one of those situations where you kind of just give in to make him stop talking, you know? Anyways, this guy was super creepy because on top of the lengths that he would go to just to get some time in the sack, he also kept trophies of his conquests. He would ask each of the people he slept with for a lock of their hair, and he kept them all. Back then, it was kind of common for lovers to keep locks of each other's hair, but George's collection was alarming because of just how many locks of hair there were. After the king died, his brothers found 7,000 envelopes, each with a lock of hair that was, quote, enough to stuff a sofa, end quote. Fun fact, if you want to see this insane collection, it is in a museum in Scotland, so check that out if you want, I guess.
Number 3, kleptomania part 2. On our spoiled queens list, Brie mentioned Queen Mary and how she just couldn't stop stealing, which is hilarious to me, just this old lady stealing your shit. Well, the last king of Egypt also had sticky fingers. He was even better at it too. Check this out. Farouk I was the youngest son of Egypt's first king, Fuad I. Now born in 1920 in Alexandria, and in his early days at school, he couldn't concentrate. The king sent him to England even after to hopefully find a better way of teaching, something that works for him, but still it was to no avail. Once the king passed away in 1936, Farouk then got the throne, but also so much property and so much money. He had hundreds of fancy cars, 75,000 acres of land. This guy had it all. Literally, he had anything he could think of, but still he felt like he needed to take more, to steal. At 17 years old, he would slam 12 eggs for breakfast and then wash it down with 30 bottles of beer. Nutritious and delicious. Horrible. On top of the fact that he loved to steal, he was the biggest hoarder. So he had thousands of shirts, randomly. He also had 50 diamond-studded walking sticks for some reason, and like a prince such as myself, he too collected coins. I mean, his collection was much nicer, but still, great minds think alike. Spoiled minds think alike, rather. Oh shit, this is eye-opening. One of the most bizarre facts about Farouk was he pickpocketed Winston Churchill once. He took the guy's watch. After everything I just said, he still decided to steal his watch. What a gem. We love him. Yeah.
At number 2, the king of pettiness. Let's talk about a ruler that the Indian state of Alwar has described as controversial. If his own people are calling him controversial, then you know something's up, and boy, you better strap in because you're in for a wild ride with this one. Maharaja Jai Singh was pretty eccentric in a pretty dark way. He was known to have a temper and act on impulse, and he did some very questionable and downright scary things. He was known to be very competitive and hated to lose. One time while playing polo, he and his team lost, and so in retaliation he blamed the horse he was using and made the horse get extra crispy. He fired his horse. I'm sure you know where I'm going with that. If not, use your noodle, I don't know. Unfortunately, the cruelty towards living things didn't stop at animals, and he was also known to kidnap women from the streets and go all criminal minds on them. On a slightly lighter note, though, the Maharaja was also known to be very petty. Once he went into a Rolls-Royce dealership, and the person working there thought that he was broke and ignored him. Thinking that this was insanely rude, he bought 7 Rolls-Royces, sent them back to India, and used them to pick up garbage. This guy was really just doing the absolute most.
And coming in at our number 1 spot, King Ludwig II. Home renovation shows rock my world. I can watch Love It or List It for months at a time. It's the dream, building your own home one day, and if you're a king, well, it's pretty easy to get that done. In our Spoiled Queens Part 2, I mentioned a princess that had a house made of ice, literal ice. Well, King Ludwig II had numerous castles built to resemble fairy tales. Literally, like fairy tales. I gotta admit, I kind of love this a lot. Ludwig was only 18 when he became the king of Bavaria in 1864, and then he had castles, like castles, more than one, built after he was inspired from romantic literature and spending some time at the opera. The kid was a dreamer, you gotta love it. He would spend his nights in one castle looking through a telescope at his new castle being built, so he would just watch it all night. That's like the king's way of waiting for your Amazon delivery. Just standing there, just like, oh, it's coming. 17 years and it's done. Just 4 years in, he designed his own castle, and to this day, it's one of the most photographed places in the world. Neuschwanstein Castle. Go check it out. It's literally a paradise.
At number 10, royal enemas. Apparently, back in the day, enemas were all the rage amongst the elite. It was believed that enemas were good for your health, so everyone was doing it to try and live a little longer than the rest of those commoners and peasants. One person who really just couldn't get enough enemas in his life was King Louis XIV. It is believed that over the course of his life, Louis XIV received thousands of enemas. When I tell you this guy was obsessed, I'm not kidding. One year, Louis received 212 enemas in just the 1 year. And of course, he had to make his enemas a little jazzy and couldn't just use water like any other person. Oh no. My guy was using things like almond milk. His enemas were also sometimes scented with orange or rose, and sometimes even colored just to make it a little more special. To get an idea of just how obsessed the elite were with receiving enemas, just think about the fact that a French duchess once received one during a court ball. The duchess was in the middle of having a conversation with Louis XIV, and during this conversation, conversation, one of her maids came over, snuck under her dress, and gave the Duchess an enema on the spot. Ew. These people were so weird. At number 9, pampered pony. I'm sure I can speak for most people when I say when you have a pet, you love and care for that thing like it is your child, right? Well, one Roman emperor might have taken that concept a little bit too far, because saying that he was obsessed with his horse is an understatement. The Roman emperor known as Caligula had a horse named Incitatus. Caligula was a horse racing enthusiast, so Incitatus was his pride and joy, and not too many people were all that thrilled about it, to be honest. When I tell you this horse was treated better than most people have ever been, I'm not kidding. The horse's stall was made out of marble, his manger was made out of ivory, and he was even fed oats flaked with gold. Caligula was also very adamant about his horse receiving a good and restful sleep before a race, and he was so serious about it that he made guards stand outside of the horse's stable to make sure that the horse remained undisturbed while it slept. This horse even had its own furniture. Like, what is he gonna do with it? He's a horse. Caligula was so fond of his horse that he even made it a priest and promised to make him consul, which was the lead position in the Roman government after the emperor, highly coveted by senators. This was the last straw for people because the emperor was putting his horse above his own people, so he was assassinated. Now, before I carry on telling you guys about the wild and crazy things that kings did back in the day, I would like to first ask you guys to consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and also maybe think about subscribing as well to see more videos like this one. At number 8, Mumia medicine. It's safe to say that medicine from the past is very different from modern times. These days we have pharmaceuticals to treat illnesses, but back in the days of old there were very different and quite questionable methods of treating ailments, and one of those methods included cannibalism. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it was common practice for elites like priests, kings, and other nobles to consume remedies that included human bones, blood, and fat as medicine to treat ailments from headaches to epilepsy, and this practice was called mumia medicine. At first, it started with people using Egyptian mummies and skulls from Irish graves for use in medicine, as bones would be ground and used in different tinctures for various uses. But soon, other parts of the body started to be used. Human fat was later used to treat ailments on the outside of the body, and blood would be consumed as well, as it was believed to contain the vitality of life. Several monarchs were known to use mumia medicine, like Charles II and William II of England, Francois I of France, and Christian IV of Denmark. At number 7, kissing sheets. For thousands of years, monarchs worried about the threat of being poisoned by their enemies, and so they thought of an array of precautions to take in order to prevent being taken out by some kind of spicy death sauce or something. Many monarchs hired tasters to try their food before it was given to the king to make sure that it wasn't poisoned, but some monarchs were also afraid of being poisoned through something that they touched. This is why Henry VIII hired someone with a very important job to make sure that his bed wasn't poisoned. The person who was tasked with making the king's bed was also required to kiss every part of his bed in the morning. They would kiss the pillows, sheets, and blankets to prove that someone hadn't smeared poison on it. The king was also concerned with people poisoning clothing too, so his clothes as well as his son's clothes were also tested for poison before getting dressed. At number 6, eternal youth. I know that there are a lot of people out there who want to live forever. I am one of those people. I am afraid of dying, but I also want to see what humanity will look like many years from now until the sun consumes the earth. Unfortunately, that's kind of impossible, at least for now, until we come up with some kind of way to make people live longer. But this idea of prolonging your life has been around for thousands of years, and one Chinese emperor was super obsessed with the idea and really tried his best to live for at least another 10,000 years. Emperor Ying Zhang was obsessed with finding a magic elixir that would make him live longer, and he demanded that his subjects find this immortality elixir for him. Now, even though he brought a lot of prosperity to people during his rule, he never let go of his demand for immortality, and it put a lot of pressure on his underlings to find him something to help him live forever, but obviously that didn't happen. He was so concerned with his lifespan that he even brought magicians into his court. His obsession alienated him from his people, and after all of that effort trying to live longer, he died at the age of 49.
Number 5, King Henry VIII. The second wife of King Henry VIII. She was found guilty of treason, and she had been charged with having relationships with 5 others, including Lord Rochford, aka her brother, George Boleyn. She had also apparently had relations with Sir Henry Norris, the king's close friend, and when I say close I mean they were really close. He was the groom of the stool. So they were close, and on top of this, Anne was also found guilty of conspiring to kill her husband. I wonder why. This list will explain a few reasons. Now, it's since been proven that these crimes were a bunch of rubbish. Anne wasn't present when these events even went down. She was still recovering from the birth of her daughter, future Elizabeth I, so there's no way she was fooling around with the groom of the stool in October 1533, Your Honor. All 5 guys involved were executed on Tower Hill, May 1536, and then 2 days later, Anne joked about her own little neck before being taken out with the sword herself. Yeah, all dark. There wasn't even a coffin for her burial. Somebody had to get an old elm chest from the Tower Armory. How horrible is that? Number 4, a bit better. Another one of King Henry VIII's wives, Anne of Cleves. Where do we even begin here? This one is, honestly, this one's pretty sad, man. Anne was right in the middle of Henry's wives. She was married to King Henry for 6 months, and it was seen as quite strategic in a way. Henry's chief minister convinced him to marry one of the sisters of Germany's Duke of Cleves, either Anne or Amelia. So in order to decide, King Henry requested that Hans Holbein travel to Cleves to paint a portrait of each sister and then come back and compare them. This is like the birth of Tinder. I'm not even joking, this is how he did it. This man compared portraits and then chose Anne because every man praiseth her beauty. Yeah, compared her to the silver moon. Yeah, try that on a dating site, write that in. I praiseth thou beauty, madam, to a silver dollar. A silver sea sand dollar shining in the moon. What? I don't know, just click it. Click send and see what happens. Then a treaty was signed. A few weeks later, Anne arrived to England, and Henry was beyond upset because she looked nothing like the portrait, apparently. How horrible is that? You look nothing like this Victorian painting. How dare you? It's 6 a.m. and you've been riding a horse for 4 weeks and you don't look like this Victorian painting? Shame. He tried to stop the wedding, but it was too late at that point, so they had to follow through. And on January 6, 1540, their marriage was official. You can't unswipe this marriage, rich boy. Anne later accepted the divorce gladly and then lived as the king's sister peacefully until her death in 1557. Number 3, Christian VII. Christian, there's an ironic name for what I'm about to tell you. The prince that couldn't keep his hands out of his pants. I don't know how else to say it. Here we go. Christian VII of Denmark. He was a young lad. He was spoiled. He was a little comfortable with his body, maybe too comfortable, and he would often just have his hands in his pants hanging out. He was like one of those, rich king. He was kind of like Joffrey from Game of Thrones. He would just sit back and like suck on candy and stuff and just, fool around. I don't know, it was gross. Middle of dinner, this guy would pass around food to his family with those gross hands. He would alternate hands and pants to handing out food. What a little twerp. Now it's unknown, but historians believe maybe, just maybe, he was a tad mad. Who's to tell? Either way, don't touch the rye bread, Christian. Thanks. Go wash your hands. Twice. Number 2, King Henry VIII. Again. Of course, we have to talk about Henry VIII again. He's pretty bad, not gonna lie. Henry VIII was King of England from 1509 to 1547. He's been married a handful of times, as we've heard by now, and all of them have went south. When Henry married Catherine, he was 49. She was a few years younger. She was actually a lot younger, classic 1500s. Way too young. And when they got married, Henry was not the same as he was when they had met. He had received a nasty jousting wound, so now he was gravely overweight. He didn't do anything. He just laid around all day and complained. So Catherine, of course, just wanted some, shred of a life, and being again quite young, too young, she decided to look for love. Well, God forbid you try and have a life in the 1500s, because then the young queen was accused of having an affair and was publicly and horribly taken out in the courtyard. And finally, coming in at number 1, Henry II. The relationship between Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine is pretty memorable. It's memorable in all the wrong ways, of course. When they first met, things were good, dare I say, with both of them. They were both young, and he was going to be king. He was young, king, guy, young man who's going to be king. And Eleanor, she was married, but once she got an annulment, their love was good. Their love was good and young and ready to be young king stuff. After the annulment in 1152, Henry and Eleanor tied the knot officially a couple weeks after. Love moves quickly, apparently. Henry started having affairs, because of course he did. At this point in this list, we're not gasping at affairs, sadly. But come 1173, Eleanor had convinced their sons to go against father. Yeah, Henry didn't take this well, and he had Eleanor locked up for 16 years. He had died, so after that point she had resumed the royal roles, because at this point those two boys had grown up and inherited the throne, Richard and John. But being locked up for that long, what a nightmare that relationship was entirely. I figured we'd end on a kind of tame one where she kind of came back and it was good. Kind of good, dare I say? I don't know.